Hi and welcome. So I'm very excited that you're here, and one of the things that I've had students constantly asking me about was how do we build a full-fledged application, like a real Android app, right? Something that is more complex, nothing too simple, so that they could see exactly how to structure a full-fledged application from start to finish, from scratch. I decided to put together this mini course, which is part of a bigger course of mine that you can actually get from Udemy in the links below. I decided to put here together so that you have a full view of how to build a clone of a very popular to-do app. So in this mini course, you will learn how to structure the entire application from scratch. So from looking at the user interface and looking at the mechanic and infrastructure in the backend, such as Room database in Android, as well as ViewModel, and many other things that I'm going to show you in this mini course. Now, before we get started, I would like to let you know, just to simplify your life, because it's a lot of code, I've actually put together a starter project you can go and download so you can follow along and start adding things to the project as I show you in this course, in this mini course. So go ahead and follow the link below so you have access to the starter project. That way it's much easier for you to get started in this mini course. So I'll let you be now, and let's go ahead and get started. So in this section, we are going to build a full-fledged application that will showcase what we've learned before. So we will have a Room database, so database that we can add and retrieve items from, and other things we've learned. Let me demo the app we are going to be building throughout this section. So as you can see here, it's a pretty good looking application in my opinion. I hope you find it true. You see here we have the title in our toolbar. So you see here it says Todoister. So that's the name I came up with. Actually, this application is actually going to be a Todoist Clone. There is a very famous app called Todoist, which essentially manages all of your to-dos, all of your appointments, and so forth. It's a really high-end application. Obviously, we're not going to be cloning everything from the main app, the Todoist app, but at least this app will mimic the fundamentals of the Todoist application. In fact, you can Google Todoist app and you'll see what I'm talking about. So that is what we're trying to mimic here, or that is kind of the clone. Pretty exciting. All right, so the great thing here is that you have this button, this floating action button. You click, and when you do that, there is this nice dialog that comes up. This is what we call a bottom sheet dialog. So it gives the application a sense of you only have one screen. So single page application, if you will. So in this case here, click, and I can add a to-do. So let's say record course, because that's what I do. And then you click there, and you can see now this kind of expanded, our bottom sheet expanded, and I can actually expand even further so we can see through everything. So now we have different options where we can give it a due date. So we can say today, tomorrow, or next. Or I can just go into the future by clicking this nice calendar and pick one here. Doesn't matter. Let's say I want this to be tomorrow. I click there, and it's going to attach this to do to tomorrow. Okay, and next I can click here to give it some sort of priority. So I want, is this a high priority or a medium priority or a low? Let's say this is high because students are waiting for the course. So once I have that, I can just click this button, and voila, our bottom sheet dropped, and then you can see we do have here this entry. Okay, and it's very contextual too if you look at this, because the priority is high and the color is red. Notice now we have this very nice radio button that is also red. Next I can click here, and let's add another one. Let's say be kind, and then click here, and I can expand that even further. And if I want to go in the future, I can go all the way. Let's say that's going to happen in March or April, because that's who I am. Click there, and then let's say that's a medium priority. That just tells you what kind of person I am. And if you click here, notice that was added. And because it's medium, the colors also are contextual. That has changed. Okay. And also we can edit each one of these entries. So if I click one, look at this. It pulls in this name, record test or record course, and I can go ahead and say updated and done. This makes no sense, but there it is. So I can also change for next week if I want, and the priority now is going to be low. The moment I click, it's going to go and update that. Everything, notice, also changed. So it's very contextual and it looks very simple, but often the very simple applications visually and also structurally, like those are actual applications that require a little bit more work to put that together. Okay. And also you see we have these 3 dots here. This is what we call the hamburger menu button. If you click here, there's this other button that is extended. If you click that further, you can see it takes us to this about screen. Okay, very good. So I can go back to the main screen and we can keep adding even more items here. So I can say, for instance, I want something new, something that says brainstorm course ideas. I can go ahead and click again, and I want this to happen a little bit later. There's the date, priority, medium. Let's save, and there you have it. Right, so there's a lot of ground to cover, and let's go ahead and get started. Now, to simplify our lives, I decided to create a starter project that you should have downloaded previous to this video. And once you have downloaded that starter project and you have unzipped it, you would have this structure here. So if you looked into our Java folder there and you probe in inside of this package, you can see we have this about activity. If you click, it's just a very simple about activity with an XML. If you click there, you can see this XML. It's very simple. Again, doesn't have much. It just says here Todoist Clone app and so forth. Okay, so this is what is already set up for you. That way we don't have to spend too much time writing the boilerplate code and all the things that you should know by now how to do yourself. So the idea here is that you have a way to get started with the bare bones, the skeleton of the application, of the project, I should say. That way we are ready to just keep going. All right, so that's what we have there, and I'm going to close this down, and then we can see you have this bottom sheet fragment. So double click here. Now, it's a very strange class in that it is a fragment. We'll talk a little bit more about fragment, but just think of a fragment as a piece of code that can structurally be used anywhere along with an activity. So we can actually pull a fragment, this piece of screen that we can take and put anywhere else we want. So it gives us a lot of structural flexibility when we create Android applications. We'll talk more about fragments. All right, there we go. So this is where we're going to create that bottom sheet we saw earlier, where when we want to add something or edit, there's that little bottom pop-up. That's why it's called bottom sheet fragment, because it pops up from the bottom and you can actually expand it and so forth, as you saw. Okay, now it's empty because it's a starter project, but we will work on it as we go through this project. So I'm just introducing what you should have so far in the starter project. And inside here, you can see that we're inflating this layout called bottom sheet. Let's go ahead to bottom sheet. You can see our bottom sheet here has some code. We have our XML code, and we also have, we can change to the design mode so we can see exactly what we have here. It's very simple. In essence, we have an edit text top there, which also has a hint text that says eat less at dinner, so users know what to expect or what needs to be added or inserted into this edit text. And we have a few icon buttons there that we've added. Now, all of these icon buttons actually pull in icons, images that we get from Android. So Android Studio gives us the capability of pulling in many different icons or images. So all of these are actually added already inside of our resources. Again, have all this or all of these. So double click, you can see they open up. Now, one thing you notice is that they end at XML. And once you open one up, you see it says vector here. So vector is just a different image format that is more flexible, but most importantly, it's a format that allows for the images to never lose resolution. Doesn't matter how big the image is, it will always keep that resolution. And there's no, as you can see, as I make this bigger, the image doesn't pixelate. Okay, so it always keeps that resolution, which is really good. Very well. All right, so next we have, of course, our main activity. It has some code here. Now, our main activity, we notice here we have this toolbar, which we can click and look at a toolbar. This all comes with Android, by the way. Depending on what you select when you create a project, you can go ahead and get the activity that contains this floating button as well as a toolbar. So this is where we can add, of course, the nav bar and other floating buttons there, as you saw earlier. But most importantly, you can see also this component tree here. If this is not open, you can always click there and open that. You can see in the component tree, we have this app bar, which is this there. And inside we have a toolbar. So toolbar, it is inside of our app bar, which allows us to then access this toolbar. So where we can add buttons and many other things there. And we have our fab floating action button. There it is. And we have a recycle view that I right away added and has everything. But next you see we have this include here. What is this include? And it's kind of off screen, as you see there. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So it turns out when we create complicated layouts, you can actually use the include tag to include other layouts. So you remember I showed you earlier here, let's go to our layout, this bottom sheet. In fact, I think, yes, this bottom sheet here. So we created it separately. And then what we're doing now is that we're including this bottom sheet into our activity main XML. And you notice it's hidden here. It's actually showing a little bit here, but it's actually hidden because remember, the idea is that it will be prompt out. It will be shown the moment we do something, in this case, when we want to add a to-do item. Okay. And so the beauty here is that we can actually include that instead of having to code all of it inside of our main activity. We can just go ahead and create separately and include it into a different layout, in this case, main activity. So if we look at the code, this is very interesting. Let's go somewhere down here. You can see we have include tag, and we say layout, and we say add layout, and we get our bottom sheet. Okay, that's very, very helpful. So nice. So that's what we have there. And we have this fragment bottom sheet, which we won't use at all. And I'll get rid of that. But most important, we have this to-do row. To-do row is going to be used to actually inflate, right? Remember, we're going to be using a recycle view. Actually have the recycle view as you see here in our activity main. This is the recycle view. We need a row that will be inflated on runtime to show up here with all of our to-do items, all right? So now we have all the pieces and bits that we're going to be using to create our project here. You should have everything ready to go. In fact, let's go ahead and give it a run real quick to make sure everything is good. All right, there you have it. You should have this running without any issues. Now, one thing to remember is that depending on when you're watching this video, and things do change in Android development, meaning our tools do change, you will need, regardless, you will have to update or let the Gradle sync up everything to your machine in order for this to work properly. Okay, so once you get the starter project, you will have to go through that process. But if all goes well, you should at least be able to see this bare bones application working. So now that we know that everything should be set up correctly, we will continue in the next video where we will get started putting together the pieces that will compose this Todoist project. Let's go ahead and take a look at the database entity structures. That way we have an overall idea of what is it that we're going to be building. Start putting together the backend database, all of the supporting classes and code, as I call it. So first, I'm going to look at the actual table or entity. Okay, how is that going to look like? Well, the table is going to look like as follows. So we're going to have a task ID column. That's where all of the item or to-dos IDs will be generated automatically. And then we'll have a task column. This is where we're going to actually store the actual task, such as eat ice cream. Okay. And of course, we're going to have the priority. So that way we can store whether the priority of this task is high, low, or medium. We have a due date. We're going to pass a date object. So when is this task due? And we also have another date type column called created at. So this created at will have the timestamp of when this item was added into our table. And then we have is done, could be true or false, okay, a boolean that we can store. Okay, and there you have it. So let's go ahead and start putting together this task entity. So back to our project, let's go inside of our package here. I'm going to create a new package to organize our code. This one is going to be called model, like that. So inside of our model here, I'm going to add a new Java class, and this class is going to be the task class as such. Okay? It's going to be actually our entity. All right, so the first thing we need to do, of course, is to make sure that this is indeed recognized as an entity in room. So I'm going to say at entity. This only works if you have already set up the room dependencies and so forth, which you should have, especially if you have downloaded this starter project. Okay, if not, you should know how to do that by now. All right, so let's go ahead and say table name. We're going to call this task table as such. There he is. And let's go ahead and add a few properties, which are going to be translated into columns. The first one is going to be public. I'm going to say long. Now notice here, I could have said int, so all of the IDs could be integers, but long is usually better because actually when these IDs are saved or auto-generated, I'm talking about a task ID that we will be creating here. When they are generated in room, they're stored as long. So let's just go ahead and add the long type from the beginning. I'm going to call this task ID, okay? And let's say public, another public, and make sure that all of these are actually public fields. Okay, so it's a task. This is going to be our task. Say also public and say priority. Now there is different kind of priority classes that already exist in the Android realm, if you will. These are not the ones that we're looking for. We're actually going to create our own priority class in a second here. Let's say priority. Okay, I'm not going to import it anything yet because I don't want this from render script. We'll create that in a second. Okay, and then we're going to say public again. This is going to be a date type. Okay, make sure you get the Java util date type. You can see it was imported as such. Call this due date. Say public again. This is going to be another date type. Call it date created. Public. The final one is going to be a Boolean type called is done as such. Okay, let's make sure that room knows that these are columns for our entity. So I'm going to say first one. So this is going to be a column info. And because I want this task ID to have a different name, so I'm going to override it by saying name. I'm going to call this task underscore ID. Now keep in mind, passing this task ID as such, what we're saying is that we want this column to be called as such, task underscore ID. If I wanted this task ID to actually continue with this name task ID as is written here, we would just leave this alone. So we would just get rid of that altogether. Okay, but that's not the case. We want this to be task underscore ID. Okay, very good. We're going to continue for our string here task. I'm going to also say at column information or info. I'm going to say name. For our name here, I don't need to change that because it's just one word. It's going to be just task. So I'm going to just remove that. So again, in this case here, room will know that yes, this name property task as it is going to be also the name for our column when the entity is created. All right. And for our priority here, I'm also going to leave as it is because I want it to be priority like this when it's created, the column name. Okay. All right, so now for our due date, in this case here, I'm going to name something different. So I'm going to say column info, and I'm going to say name as such, and I want this to be written as due date as such, and at column info, also, I want this to be, let's say name, it's going to be created at such, and also is done. I'm going to also change, say column info, and name is going to be is underscore done. I like to give spaces here so they're easily visible. Okay, very well. Now, one thing to not forget is that we know that this task ID is going to be our primary key. So we need to annotate that. So I'm going to say at primary key, and I want to say this is going to be auto-generated, pass it to true. Very important. Very well. Now, before I create getters and setters and constructor here, let's talk about this priority that we have created, or we must create the actual class of ours. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a separate class, but it's going to be a special class. This class is what we call an enum. Now, what is this thing? Let's take a look. So we're going to create this class called priority, and it's going to be an enum class. So it's going to look something like this: public enum priority, and it has these fields that kind of look a little bit different than what we used to. First of all, what is enum? Well, an enum is essentially a class that represents a group of constant variables. So meaning variables that don't change, just like final variables, okay? So the idea here is that when we create this enum class, we're going to be able to say whenever we want, we can say priority dot and access either high or medium or low or anything else if we had other fields inside of this enum. So it's a simpler class that we can put all of our constant variables in it so we can quickly go and fetch those variables when we need them. Okay, let's go ahead and code. Let's go back to our code and create this priority enum class. All right, so back to our code. Again, remember this is red and it gives you this option to import this render script.priority. That's not what we want. We want to create our own priority class, which is going to be an enum. Back to our project, and inside here, I'm going to go ahead and create, say right click, new class, and just going to go class. Let's call this priority. It's going to be a class that is. Let's go back and say priority as such. And there we have it. Now it's going to be a public class. And as I said, it has to be an enum. So we're not going to add this class there. I'm going to say enum as such. Okay. All right. So the constant variables, in this case, the fields that we want are 3. And you will notice the syntax is a little bit different. Usually what we need to do is we need to make these fields, or these constant variables I should call them too, they have to be all caps. So in this case, I'm going to have high, okay? And then I'm going to say medium and low as such. And there you have it. That's all. Now, sometimes with enums, you can actually create constructors and do all sort of things. But in this case, this is all we need. That's totally fine. So now that we have this enum, we can go back to our task. Notice now it's going to have another option here. Notice, let's see. It went ahead and got our enum. Let's see, is this priority the one? Yes, it is our priority enum. Make sure that that's what we have. All right, there we go. All right, so now we have created the priority enum. Now again, make sure if you hover over like this, let it stay there for a bit. It's going to tell us exactly that this is from our package, model public enum priority. It has to be from our package. Otherwise, you're going to be having a different enum that it's not very useful for us. Okay, let's go back here. Let's go and actually create a constructor first. So I'm not going to add the task ID because remember, the task ID will be created and added automatically. So I'm just going to select anything else, all of other properties or fields as such. Okay, and next let's go ahead and create getters and setters for all of them, and there you have it. And for now, what I also like is I like to override the toString. That way it gives me the string representation of this class if I need to. If I create a new task and just want to see what that task, the string representation has, all the fields, as you can see here, I'll be able just to call that this task class, and it will give me this string representation of all the fields, which is very handy, especially when we are debugging our application. Okay, very well. So we've done a few things here. So we've created the task class, which, as you know by now, it will be transformed into an actual table or an entity. And we have all the fields, we have the task ID, and it's going to be auto-generated as our primary key. And we have all of the fields or columns there. And we created the constructor and getters and setters. Okay, and something new here is that we actually extracted or created this priority enum. And you can see now it says E there to say that this is a special class called enum. All right, it's very nice. Very good. So in the next video, we'll continue working on our models and other classes that we need to build up this application. Okay, I'll see you next. Very well, so we're making real good progress. Next, let's go ahead and create the actual database room. Okay, so inside of our main package, I'm going to right click and create a new package. And this one is going to be called util for utility. So this is where I'm going to put all of the util classes. Right click, say new, another Java class. And in this case, let's call this task room database, such, good. And we know that this has to be actually an abstract class. So I'm going to say abstract as such. Very good. And right away, I'm going to go ahead and extend our room database. Okay, there it is. You can see now it was imported automatically. So let's create a few instance variables here that we're going to be using. First of all, I'm going to say PSF. This is very handy. You can actually create static final fields here by just saying PSFI or PSFS for a string. This is for an int. Okay, it's very handy, so you don't have to type all of that yourself. In this case here, I'm going to add, this is going to be the number underscore of threads. Okay, so I'm going to add 4. You can add any number, but 4, that's fine. So what this is going to do, we're going to be using in a second here, because we want to make sure that all this transaction, of course, we're going to go through this executor service that will allow us to do things in the backlog or in the background thread. Let's go ahead and create another PSF there. And this one is going to be volatile. Okay, I'm going to call this, it's going to be an instance of this same class here, task room database. Such, I'm going to call this instance. I'm going to be using soon. Let's make this private because we don't want this to be shown anywhere else. And doesn't have to be final. You can't do that. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to create another PSF there. And this one is going to be our executor service. Okay, from Java concurrence there, and it's going to be, I'm going to call this database writer executor. I'm going to set it to executors, that, and I'm going to go ahead and create new thread pool here, new fixed, that is, thread pool, and pass the number of threads we've created earlier, right? So next I'm going to create a public static method here of type task room database, right? I'm going to call this get database. So essentially will allow us to actually create an instance of this one database called final context here, because that's what we need. And I'm going to just go ahead. Looks like we need to import our context. Well, inside here, I'm going to make sure that our instance, current instance of our database, if that's null, that means it doesn't exist, then I'm going to use synchronize. This is all about making sure that everything goes back to the background thread and there's no issues really. And this is where I'm going to go ahead and pass our task room database as such. It needs to pass that class. And if also our instance again is null, in this case, then I'm going to go ahead and create a new instance of this room database. Okay, so we're trying just to make sure that we only have one instance of this database created throughout this whole project. So I'm going to say room database builder, and I'm going to build database. To build database, I'm going to have to pass context and get the application context like that. And then I need to pass the task room database, the class, right? Because we'll know exactly what needs to be done. And then I'm going to pass the name of our database. So what I can do really is create another string here. So PFS or PSF, that is string type. Okay. And I'm going to say database. Let's make this cap database name as such, and I want a database name to be Todoist database like this. It's easier that way, so we can actually call it here, called database name like this. Okay, and then we're going to continue. We're going to build that database. But before we even do that, we can also add a callback here, which will allow us to do all sort of things. The first thing is we could input or add things to our database when we start this database. When the first time this database is created, we can add things to it. But the other thing too is this is where we can delete everything every time we do something to our database. That way we have always a clean slate. Okay, we can do all sort of things. So in this case here, I'm going to just pass s room database callback, which we haven't created. So we're going to go ahead and create this callback at the top real quick here. So I'm going to say it's going to be a final. It's going to be a room database that callback such. I'm going to call that, right? This is what we passed there as a callback. And we're going to say new room database that callback. And then here, let's make sure we have finished business there. Okay, so now inside here, let's go ahead and override a method there, which is going to be the onCreate method. Okay, so again, that's what I'm saying. So when this database is being created, we can then invoke and do whatever we want, right? In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and say database writer executor, and that execute and pass a runnable here. So again, this will allow us to do things in the background, which is exactly what we always want to do when it comes to databases and writing things into database. Okay. In this case here, we can invoke DAO and write and do all sort of things. And we'll come back and do just that later, but at least we have that callback ready for us to go. Now we have an issue here because we must, of course, return, say return. What is it going to return? The instance that we want to make sure is around, or if it's not around, we want to create that instance of the database. Very good. And while we're here, say public abstract method here called Task Dao, which we haven't created, and call this Task Dao as such. And you know by now that any abstract method doesn't have a body. That's the whole idea. All right, so we need to create this Task Dao class. What we're going to do is go back to our project, and in our package, we're going to create a new package. Call this data to organize our code. I'm going to create a new Java class, and this is going to be Task Dao. Hit enter. And remember, this is actually going to be an interface. Okay, let's go back down here, and let's go ahead and import that. All right. Now we have no errors and our Task Dao is created. And of course it's empty, but that's fine because we're going to be working on our Task Dao. Okay, so our Task Dao here, first of all, let's never forget, we need to make sure that this is recognized as a DAO indeed. We can use annotation, say at DAO, or data access object. It's very important because this is the interface that we always talk about, which will allow us to then invoke the insert methods and actually insert things into our database and do all of the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete operations. All right, so the first thing is going to be our insert. So I'm going to add insert as such. And I'm going to say void, call this insert task. To insert a task, well, we need a task object, and we already have that. We've created that. Okay, very good. And then another thing we would want to do is to delete all of our tasks in our table, which is not necessarily something you want to do, but it's nice to have it. So I'm going to say query. I'm going to pass our query here, which is going to be, I'm going to say delete all from our table, which is task underscore table. Okay, looks like I'm having issues here, which means I need to then say void delete all. This is the method. When it's called, it's going to do that. And I have an issue here because I may have made a mistake. Delete all. Actually, I don't have to say all. I just have to say delete from task table. Again, very dangerous. That means we'll wipe everything from our task table, but sometimes we need to purge things. All right, we'll continue here. And let's say we want to get tasks. So a list of all tasks. So in this case, I want to say live data because we want to encapsulate this data, the list of tasks that we may be receiving, right? The types are going to be task. All of that is going to be inside or wrapped inside of live data because we want the flexibility of live data because we can then listen to events when the data changes, then anything that has been listening to that data, in this case on our user interface, it will also change automatically. Beautiful stuff. All right, in this case here, I'm going to call this get tasks. Okay, that's the name of our method. And I'm going to say add query, and it's going to be again select all from our table, task table as such. Now that could work, but I want to make sure that I call it exactly as it was saved as. And there we have it. Okay, very simple indeed. So really exciting things here. The next thing is, it could be that we want to get just one task, right? We want to just get one task by passing the ID. Again, I'm going to say live data. I'm looking at one task, not a list of tasks. Okay, say get. In this case here, I'm going to pass a long type as the ID. Okay? And let's go ahead and pass the actual query here. The query is going to be something along these lines. I'm going to say select all from our table, task table, that is, and I want to say where our task ID. I can say task ID, right? But I like to say task underscore table dot task ID, okay? Where that is equal, of course, to our ID. Notice the syntax here is very important. We say colon ID to say that whatever we are passing this ID here is going to be passed there. And it will compare if the task ID is equal to whatever we pass, then that's indeed what we want to delete. I'm sorry, then that is indeed what we want to retrieve, not delete. All right. And we're going to continue here. The next one is update. We want to, of course, to be able to update a task. Let's say void update, and we need to pass a task that needs to be updated. And the beauty here is that we don't need to do any query, really. We can just use this annotation, call update, and we're done. Beautiful. And delete, we want to delete a task. Yes, we can do that by say void delete a task. We need to pass the task that we want to delete, okay? And we're going to go ahead and annotate to say delete. Just like that. And we're done with our Task Dao. Now, going back to our database, task room database there inside of our callback, it's very easy. Now we can go ahead and do something like this. We can go ahead and say Task Dao as such, create the actual instance is equal to instance, our database instance, Task Dao. So now I'm actually invoking this Task Dao method that we created there. Okay, and then I can say Task Dao and delete all, right? So a clean slate. So we can do that. And then if you want it, we can go ahead and also start writing things into our database, writing to our table and so forth. And there you have it. And you can see that the get database is actually grayed out because we haven't actually used that to create and get database, because we haven't actually used the get database in an activity or fragment or anywhere else where we want to start creating that database and go from there. But the infrastructure, as you see, is now set up for us to move on. Actually, we have one more thing we need to do. You notice here that I have not done what is really important, which is to make sure to annotate our class, this task room database, to be known as an actual database. Okay? It's very easy to forget about this important detail. That's why in many cases, the moment I create the class, I annotate it right away because it's really, really easy to forget, as you see here. And then you start getting errors and then you get frustrated and it doesn't help anybody in your household. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to say at database database, and then I'm going to say entities. Remember, we need to pass, okay, when we create this database, what are the entities or entity? In this case, could be just 1, 2, or 100. Let's hope it's not 100 at this point, but at least one we need to pass here. So in this case here, I'm just going to go and pass, say, Task Dot Class. Remember, if we had more entities, we could have just gone and add another entity here, like priority or so forth. Okay, and of course we need to go ahead and pass the version of our database. It's 1, and export schema, I'm going to just say to false because we don't want that. All right, and there you have it. Next, we are going to create our repository because we have our Task DAO where we have all of our CRUD operations, that is, and we have our task room database where we create the database. And don't forget to actually add the entities that will be created when this database is created. This class is run. Okay, it's very important. So let's go back to our project tab there, and now we're going to create our repository. So our repository is going to be inside of our data package. I'm going to say new Java class, and this is going to be, I'm going to call this Todoist repository. There it is. A very nice name. So the repository is actually not a necessary class to be had. However, it's very helpful because you now have one central place where all the data, independent of where the data is coming from, could be coming from a table, database table, or room database table, that is, or could be coming from a network somewhere obscure. Okay, so we have one central place where we have all our data. All right, and one reason you can see that this is indeed not part of room database is because you will notice that we don't even have to add any of those annotations, right? Like the @database or @repository. So there's no such thing. So that's when we know that this is merely for code organization purposes. All right, so our repository here needs to have access or have handles for our Task DAO. Okay, so I'm going to say private, make it final, and this is going to be Task DAO as such. Call this Task DAO. And I'm going to also have another private final. This is going to be live data, which will have a list of all of our tasks. Okay, makes sense. I'm going to call this all tasks. And let's go ahead and import. And looks like it doesn't recognize our task. Let's go import our class. And it doesn't recognize the list as well. Let's go also import a list. That way we are set. Okay, so we got these squiggly lines here. The reason why is because we must actually create a constructor that will instantiate all of those. So I'm going to say Command N to create a constructor. I'm going to pass those two like that. Now I'm going to change a few things here. Instead of passing all of that, I'm actually going to pass application, say application here, because you will see in a second here, this is where we're going to instantiate our database and it needs the application context. So now I'm going to say task database, room database, that is, database, and I'm going to say is equal to task room database, invoke the get database, then we pass our application context. Very nice. Now we have the handle here of our room database. And in this case here, this task DAO, of course, is not going to work because we're not passing as parameters there. So that means we need to instantiate them. How do we instantiate our task DAO? Well, we go through our database, which we just instantiated or created. So I'm going to say database.task DAO. Remember, this task DAO, let me click there, comes from where? Comes from our room database. It is indeed a method of type task DAO, which indeed returns a task DAO. And this task DAO here, if you notice correctly, the moment this run the first time, we actually have a handle of that. That's where we use to delete everything that may exist in our table. If there's nothing there, then nothing really happens because generally speaking, we can't remove things that don't exist. Okay, very good. So there we go. We're going to do the same thing for all tasks. Now, what is it that we want for all tasks? Well, all tasks are going to be a list of tasks, which is going to be wrapped in a live data. That means then we can still use here our task DAO, this guy there. So we don't even have to say this because we're not setting up as we would have before, right? Because we know that we're talking about this task DAO there. So we can remove that. So in this case, I'm going to say task DAO, what we just got from our database. I'm going to say .get tasks. So now, whenever we instantiate our repository, this will run, which means we're going to create a database instance. We're going to get that instance, and then we are going to fetch a task DAO. Remember, Task Dao has all of these methods we can use to insert, delete, query the database, right? And then we are going to fill out these all tasks with all tasks we get from Task Dao. So essentially we are calling this get tasks from select all from task table, which returns a list of tasks wrapped in live data. Hence the type that we want to make sure that all tasks also is live data as such. Okay? Okay, very well. So now we're going to create some sort of public interfaces, meaning these are we're going to create methods that will be used anywhere else we want to actually retrieve the information we want. So the first one, I'm going to say public. This is going to be live data because we'll be expecting a list of tasks. Go back there as such. And I'm going to call this get all tasks. Well, get all tasks as a method will have to return, say return what? All tasks. This all tasks here has been filled up when the Todoist repository constructor was called. Very handy, right? There it is. And the next method for our repository, can say public. This one is going to be a void. I'm going to call insert. I'm going to pass a task, such. And to insert, we are going to say task room database dot. We're going to use the database writer executor. This is very important again because we want to go through this guy here to do this insertion in the background thread, because we don't want to be in the front of our user interface thread, which will then bog down our system and our application may end up lagging and all of the sort of things, right? So in this case here, I'm going to say dot execute. Notice I need to pass a runnable, which allows me to run things in the background again. That's exactly what I want. And in this case here, we're going to use Lambda because that's what we do. And let's see, make sure this and put the arrow there to say then I'm going to use task Dao dot insert and pass the task that we are passing there. So now when we say repository dot insert, we pass task Dao. Inside, it's going to go ahead and say, okay, it's time to insert. We're going to call the task room database and invoke the database writer executor that is, to make this happen in the background. It's very important. And then we pass the task Dao, say insert, and insert the actual task. Let's continue here. Let's say public. Let's say now we want to get one task. I'm going to say live data. I just want one task and say get, and we need to pass long ID, and this just return a task Dao get long and pass the ID, right? Very simple. Now I'm going to update. To update, I'm going to say void update, pass a task that we want to update, and we're going to call again our task room database executor, because that's very important. Execute, pass a lambda expression there, task Dao, and we want update and pass the task that we want to update. And of course, the most famous one is delete. Let's say public void delete, and to delete, we need to pass the task we want to delete. And we're going to go say task room database, that database writer again. What do you know? And let's go ahead and pass the lambda again, task Dao, and we are going to delete. What is that we want to delete? We want to delete a specific task that we pass. And just like that, we've done our repository. Okay. All right. So we're making real good progress. So we're really working on our back infrastructure, the databases, doing all the CRUD. So create, read, update, and delete, and make sure that the repositories and the task room database which we created, all of that works together. And of course, with our task Dao, which is what links between our repository and the inner infrastructure of our database, right? Because if you look back to our task Dao, this is what's happening here. We're actually going to our task table and get things or deleting things and so forth, okay? So this is an infrastructure that you should really think more and more about and do more exercises and really understand that this is the best way so far to get this job done. If you were to try to do this the old way, which means you would have to use the SQLite helper classes and all of that, it would still work, but it will take more time, a lot of boilerplate code, and you're prone to having a lot of issues because there's no safe checking really. But with room database, it makes our code much simpler. As you can see here, to delete things, to add things, this is all you do. To update, you add the add update notation, and then you are ready to go. Much easier, much simpler. So I know it's a little bit more code, but it is indeed what is recommended to do when we are trying to do anything related to databases in Android. Very well, and in the next video we'll continue making good progress. All right, I'll see you next. Next, we'll look at the task view model. This is we're getting closer to the top of the mountain, if you will, closer to the user interface. This is going to be the direct interactor with the user interface. So let's go back to our project and go to our model. Let's open our model there. Inside of model, I'm going to right click, new class. This is going to be, call this task view model as such. And this will extend Android view model life cycle like this. And of course, we'll have to create a matching constructor as such. And in our matching constructor here, what we need to do is we are going to create. So, and there you have it. Let's close this down, have more space. So we're going to have a few fields here. The first one, I'm going to say public, static. We need to get a hold of our repository, right? So we'll say Todoist repository. Call this repository. That's fine. I'm going to say public final, and this is going to be live data, which will have a list of all of our tasks that we may have. Call this all tasks like that. And so, of course, we will need to create our repository or instantiate our repository by saying new repository, Todoist repository that is, and pass our application as the context, because that was the contract. And once we have our repository, we can use the repository again to go and invoke any of these public methods, public interfaces as I call them, because we can then go and get, for instance, the insert by calling insert, pass in the task, and then this code is run and we insert that task. Okay, so it makes it much easier. All right, so now we have our repository. We can say all tasks first, and I'm going to use the repository we just created or instantiated and say get all tasks. And always keep in mind the types that we're getting are very important, because get all tasks, go back to our repository. You notice get all tasks is a method that returns live data containing a list that contains tasks. That's why we also notice that these all tasks, we know ahead of time, this all tasks will need to also be the same type. Otherwise, obviously, things won't work. So always keep in mind of types in Java. It's very crucial. Very good. So we have our task view model constructor there. Then here we can go ahead and create a few other methods. So in this case here, I can create a public, say public as such, live data, and this is going to be a list called task. Again, it sounds like repetition, but it's actually not. Now, the great thing here, we can call the same names. We can use the same names for all of our methods because we're in different classes per se. Okay, so whenever I say task view model dot get all tasks, that means then in this case I'm expecting to return, say return all tasks, because at this point I should have all of these tasks filled up from our repository that get all tasks. Okay, so remember, this is get all tasks from our repository and not from this task view model. All right, okay, I'm going to say public. I'm going to create a static one here, void, say insert. I'm going to insert a task object. I'm going to say repository, insert, and pass that task. We're going to continue, in this case, get with the public live data. I'm going to just get one task. It has to be live data. Say get and pass along ID. This will return, we'll go through repository dot get, pass that ID like this. Okay, return that live data task. And I'm going to say public static void update, and I'm going to update this task as such. I'm going to say repository update and pass the task. Public again, static void delete, and so repository dot delete, pass that task. We are done with all of the underlining infrastructure that we need. And I think it's important for us to revisit the Android room architecture diagram so we can see where we're at this point with the infrastructure that we've built for this application. And it's always a good idea to have that in the back of your mind, because it kind of helps you guide and see the reasons why we do what we're doing. So let's take a look at the diagram once again. So here is our Android room architecture diagram that I think, again, you should always have handy, especially when you're creating databases using room. Okay, so at the bottom, we've created the table entity, which actually is going to be inside of our SQLite database, right? And right away, we created DAO, so Data Access Object, which interacts directly with our SQLite. So we saw the DAO has the methods that do the CRUD operation. So create, read, update, and delete, okay? And within all of that, we actually encapsulated all inside of Room database. So this is where we create our database. We pass in our entity to say, okay, when you create this database, this is the entity class that you need to use to map out how the structure of the database will look like. The tables, the columns, the IDs, and so forth, okay? And then we created the repository, which is the single source of truth for all app data, which allows us to have this clean API for UI to communicate with. Okay. Again, it's not necessary to have a repository. It's not part of this architecture, but it's very helpful because you could have many sources of data where your data is coming from. So having a repository and have that connector as the place where all the sources of data that you may have are coming through is a good thing to have. And just now we just finished the ViewModel, which includes the live data to allow the changes to be notified through the observer mechanisms with the user interface. So when data shows up and it changes, it notifies the user interface that something has changed, and therefore it should also update that data. So this makes our lives as developers way easier and less stressful. All right, so now that we have that, we can start playing at the UI controller or the user interface side of things. So in our activity or fragments or whatever it is that we want to use or see this data from, right? So it makes sense. So in the next video, we're going to test this infrastructure that we created by adding pieces of data and log them out so we can see that things are indeed working. So now that we have created the underlying infrastructure, it's time for us to take a look and see if we can save something into our database. All right, so the first thing we need to do, let's go ahead at the top here. I'm going to create a private instance variable here, call this item view, and this is going to be a task view model. Call this task view model as such. And right inside of our main, somewhere around there, I can go ahead and instantiate it. So it's a task view model, and I'm going to use the new view provider. That is the model view provider factory as such. And we pass main.this and then .get application content, .get application as such, new line. Let's put this in a new line so it's easier to read. And then outside, I'm going to say .create, and we need to pass our task view model class like that. Okay, so now we have our task view model. That means we can then use our task view model and do all of these and call all these methods that we want. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, let's go inside of our fab button here, this floating action button. On click, we're going to get rid of all this snack bar because we don't need it. I'm going to just go straight. First of all, we can actually minimize this by using lambda like this. And here I'm going to go ahead and use our view model. First of all, I'm going to create a task object. Let's say task such. Call this task is equal to new task. And I want to pass a few parameters. So first of all, I'm going to pass the string task and say to do. And then let's pass the priority. The priority, I can just go ahead and say priority dot high. Remember that we are using the priority enum class. And then the next thing we need to pass, let's see, it's not helping us. Let's see what else. So we got a due date and date created. Now to get a due date, in this case here, what I need to do is I'm going to use a calendar class, a calendar java.util, let's say .get instance like this, and then get the time like that. So this will just get the due date, which is going to be pretty much the moment we add this item into our table, which is not necessarily what we want, but this works. I'm going to do the same thing for, I believe that's going to be, that was due date. We want a date created. So this is actually more appropriate if I say like this calendar.get instance and that get time, because this will be when this is added to our database. We're testing things out right now, and so we don't need to worry too much about a lot of things. Okay, so and then we need to pass a boolean whether this is done or not. So I'm going to just say false to say that it's not done yet. All right, so we have our object here, a task that we can put into our table. To do so, of course, we're going to go ahead and say task view model, and we can say dot. Look at this, because in our task view model class, we have methods that we can easily use directly. So for task view model, notice for the insert is a static that we can go ahead and use. This means that we don't need to actually go through, in this case, our model, task view model object we instantiated here, right? Because it's a method that is static, we can actually just say task view model. Let's say task view model like that. And I can go ahead and directly say that insert. Now, the reason why this is easier that way, we don't have to go through our task view model, even though I did instantiate it here. We're going to use it later to do other operations such as get all tasks, as well as get particular task. Now, the difference here is that when we get all tasks, we are receiving live data, which is a list of tasks, and wrapping that into a live data. The same thing happens when we're getting one task. Okay, but the rest, because we're inserting and updating and delete, we just made those static so that it's easier for us just to go ahead and straight away do what we want to do. Right? So, all right, so to insert, obviously we just need to pass a task. Now, in this case here, you would think that if we ran this application, in fact, let's go ahead and run and see if this is going to work. I think this is a good test. Let's run. Aha. This is what I wanted to tell you about, even though our emulator is still not awake, but there is an error that happened right away while this was compiled. This is the power of Room database. So it's telling here that cannot figure out how to save this field into database. Which field is that? Is this priority field. And it says you can consider adding a type converter for it. What is this all about? Well, it turns out because we said, if we go back to our task, in fact, it went and showed our task.java, and this is the field. This is the field here, but also remember, this is an entity, which means a table, which also means this is a column. So when we run this piece of code, we say we want to insert this task to our table, and this task has to do as the task, and priority is priority.high. The compiler Room database goes ahead and looks at this and says, I don't understand what this is because I can't add this to my database because I don't know what type this is. That means I can't really add that to the database. So the same thing will happen obviously with this calendar that get instance and get the time, because these are types. Even though we know in our tables we said we understand those are date types as well as priority types. This is a custom type that we created, and in a way this is also some sort of a custom type per se. So those are the types that it doesn't know what to do with. So it is saying you need to create some sort of a converter class that will automatically convert these types into the appropriate types that can be parsed and added or saved or persisted into our database. Now, this is another way for me to showcase how great Room database really is, because all you have to do is to create a class called converter. You can call whatever you want. Let's go ahead and do that real quick here. Let's put that inside of our util. Right, new Java class. Let's call this converter. You could call anything you want, but naming is very important in Java. In fact, let's say converters, because we're going to add a few methods here. Like that, hit enter. Let's close this down for more space. Okay, so we have our converter class here. What we're going to do is we are going to create a few methods that will convert this, for instance, as an example, this date here into a timestamp Unix type, which is recognized by Room database as a valid type to be saved as. So that way, when we run our application, whenever the compiler gets to this part, it's going to convert that automatically before it adds that to our database. And conversely, what we also want to do is create another method that will convert that back into a data. That way we can extract back into that format that we want. The same thing with priority. Okay, so we're going to say public. We're going to make them statics. That way we don't have to create an object of this converter class in order to access it. I'm going to say start with date. Okay, date like that. I'm going to say from timestamp. So I'm converting from timestamp into something else, in this case a date. So we're going to pass a long value called value. We could call anything we want, and then this will return what? So we're going to do some very awesome coding here, really. So what we're going to do here is going to say something like this. Well, first of all, we're going to say value that we received, if that value is equal to null, if that value is null, that is, then, well, we're going to return null. else we're going to say new date and create a date out of this value that we are receiving. Because remember, the idea is that this will convert the same way when we get stuff from our database. Once we've saved, it will have been saved as a timestamp, which means it's going to be a long value. Okay, so we're going to convert that back into a new date type so we can get that. That's why it says from timestamp and returns a date type. Now, for this to work with all of our classes or all of our databases and entities and everything, we need to tell the compiler by annotating it and say that this is indeed a type converter like this. All right, I'm going to do the same reverse of what we have here. So I'm just going to copy this. And instead of returning a date, we're going to return a long. So this is what will be used from timestamp. Actually, let's say this is going to be date to timestamp. So this is the inverse of what we have from timestamp, in this case, to date, because it returns a date. And now we're going to say from date to timestamp. So this is going to be chosen or used to convert the date type, which is exactly what we need, this date type, into a timestamp which will be acceptable to be added into our database. So instead of returning that, we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to say instead of value, this is going to be actually date that we're passing like that. And we're going to check if date is null, then everything is null. Else we're going to say date dot get time like that. Okay. And now we're going to do the same conversion for this other type, which is in this case our priority. We can go back to main, which is what we're passing here when we create the task. All right, so let's come down here. I'm going to say at type converter. That's very helpful. Public static. In this case, I'm going to expect a string type coming here. Say from priority. And then I'm going to say pass the priority type as such. And so what I'm going to return is going to be priority, of course. I'm going to check if that is null. Then, of course, we return null. Else, we're going to return the priority dot name. The beauty here is that what is this dot name field? This dot name field comes already from Enum class. So any Enum class, you can actually return the name of that field as a text, as you see, as a string. Okay. Again, what are we doing here? Well, from priority, meaning we're going to pass the priority and we're going to try to convert that into just a string, which means we're going to just get the string representation of that enum field. And we're going to do the same thing, the opposite. In fact, let's just go ahead and type all out. I'm going to say add type converter and give some space. And I'm going to say public static. Now we're going to get priority, or this is what we're going to be returning. Say to priority like this, and of course we're going to pass string priority, and we're going to return priority that we're passing. If that's null, well, if that's null, then we're going to just say it's null. Else, actually, this is the opposite, like that. Else, we're going to say priority that get the value of this string priority that we're passing. So this is the converter class. Now the beauty here really is that all we have to do is pass this converter class inside of our database so that it knows automatically. So let's go back to our database. There, see, we have a database entity. We can pass that also by annotation. I'm going to say at type converters. Look at that. And we can pass as many type converters as we want, just like as we can pass as many entities as we want in our entities array there. Okay. In this case, we only have one class that we want to pass. In this case, it's going to be converter class there. Make sure it's within our project. Okay. Say dot class. That's all you have to do really, because now what happens is that when this run, it will know, okay, there is indeed a converter class that needs to be passed around when we create the database. So it will know exactly which types that we have added to our database, in our DAO, in our table, and everything that will need converting before and after when we want to add to the database and we want to retrieve. That's all you have to do. So all of this is actually being used here along with our database annotation. We have this type converters annotation. Does it make sense? So now this problem we had before, this one, we should not see anymore. In fact, let's go ahead and see if that's true. Let's go ahead and run one more time. See, now it's installing, no errors, nothing really is preventing us from running this app. If you go to run again, there's no errors, build, everything is good. Nice. All right, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and open the database inspector, just because we want to see if we are able to add that first to-do task that we are adding here when we click this floating button. Let's go ahead and open our database. I think it's still opening, I believe. Give it a second. The reason why you don't see this, now look at this. Everything is set up, but it says databases, and this is all grayed out. The reason why is because we're running this pretty much for the first time. So the database really hasn't been created yet, right? So it makes sense. So what we're going to do really is we're going to click, voila. The moment you clicked, now the database was created, and you can see there is the task table. We have the task ID, task priority, and so forth. The table is indeed empty because if you click here, you'll see that, let's say, select all from table, like that. If you run, actually, it's not empty because you can see we were able to add one task there. And you can see also there is the ID, the due date, and created at. These are Unix timestamps that were added automatically when we added this calendar that get instance get time, right? So this was converted because we have this type converter class, which we created, which automatically was called to do the conversion. Automatically, everything is working perfectly. The same thing happened with our priority field. If we go to main here, this one that we added, it was also automatically converted and all is good. So now we're able to actually pass those values to our, or persist in this case, into our database, our table. So if I go ahead and click again, we're going to add the same item. Let's go ahead and refresh. The same item was added twice. And the other thing you also can do is you can say live updates. If you tick that live update, every time you click, you should see the live update happening. We are adding essentially the same item anyway, so that doesn't really help, but you see that it's working perfectly. So the infrastructure we put together is actually working. We were able to create the database and the table and the converters. Everything is indeed great. Now it's time for us to look more towards putting together the user interface part of things to allow users to add items, update and delete, and do all sort of things. All right, very well. Let's go ahead and keep going doing just that. So we've learned how to add a few tasks actually. So we added 3 of them. They happen to be all the same. That's fine, but at least we know things are working perfectly. Now, of course, the question will be like, let's test to see if we can get something from our database. Now, the question is, now, of course, it's always nice to see if we are able to also retrieve something from our table. You should be able to do this. So I would ask you to pause the video for a few minutes and see if you can figure out how to retrieve information from our table. Keep in mind that we are going through our task view model. All right, go ahead and give it a try. All right, so I hope you were able to do that. If not, that is not a problem whatsoever. So here's what we're going to do. Outside of our floating action button here, in fact, right below our task view model, what we're going to do is I'm going to say task view model as such, and then I'm going to say dot get all tasks. And there you have it. But the beauty here is that we can attach an observer to say that, because this is a live data, right? I can say observer or observe like this and pass this as the owner of this life cycle. In this case, I'm going to say new observer list like this. And there you have. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space so we can see. And as you know, let's go ahead and use Lambda to simplify our life. So now we have a list, in this case, of tasks. So I can say something like for, I'm going to say task, call this task, and pass our task. This is a different kind of for loop. So what we're saying here is that every task that we get from our task array list, or list, I should say, same thing really, we're going to put that in a task object, which makes sense. So now I can say log D inside here, and I can pass a plus task and say, let's get task like this. And for our log here, let's create a field here let's call this item like this. Okay, so if we have something in our database, obviously, when we run our app, we should be able to, of course, see the task for each task that we have in our database. Now we know, of course, because we can see that our database has tasks, and we should see at least 3 to-dos. Let's go ahead and run. In fact, let's first go to logcat instead of verbose, it's debug, and we're going to just pass our item tag. So item like this. Okay, let's go ahead and run. And you can see we have our to-dos. Now, why is it that we're only getting 2? The main reason why we only get 2 is what happens is it just shows 2 to signify that the rest is just repetition. That's just how, in most cases, our logcat works. Okay, so initially we do know that we have 3, but at least we can see that we are getting all of them. And what we can do also is that we can say, for instance, instead of get our task like that, we want to get something more unique. Say date created, say get, let's get ID. I think that's probably going to be great. So we can see all of the IDs. Let's run again, open our logcat, and now you can see 1, 2, 3, because these are IDs and they're all unique. Okay, so just keep in mind that if you don't see the right number, as we saw earlier, the to-dos, they all have the same name. So logcat usually will cut off repetitions. If there are too many repetitions, just shows a couple or a few to signify that things are working. So it's a little bit misleading, but now because the IDs are unique, then you can see all of the IDs. Does that make sense? All right, there we go. So things are indeed working, right? This is good, very good news. So what we have left really is to start putting together the infrastructure, the user interface side of things. So we can, of course, when we click this add button, something will pop up. In this case, our bottom sheet view fragment will pop up, and then we can add things. And then when we say save, then we're going to start seeing a recycle view showing all the information. Now it's all about just mechanics, but at least we know that everything, the underlying architecture is set up for us to work on the user interface without having to worry about a lot of things. Very good. So that's what we're going to be start doing in the next videos. Let's start with our recycler view adapter, because that is the central piece. If you remember correctly, we want to make sure that, let's run this app once again. We want to make sure that when we add something, or if there's something already in our database, which in this case, it is indeed true, we saw earlier, we want to populate those items, those to-dos, or those tasks right away. And if we look back to, let's look at our resources here. Let's go to our layout. We notice we have this to-do row, which came with the starter project. So it's very simple. We have a radio button there that's added. We have a to-do row text view, and we have this to-do row chip. So the chip is a very interesting view or widget that allows you to have something like this. So you can add an icon, maybe a little bit bigger. You can see it has that very nice enclosing background there. It looks like a pill, really. And you can add text. So it really enhances the user interface. So, and then we have this view that I added here, which is a linear layout. That way we have this nice kind of gray divider there. I kind of like that. Okay. So that's what we have here. Nothing really out of this world. And of course, if you want, you can look at the actual code. It's always nice. Remember, you can always write the XML code or use the design, or you can do both. Okay, so likely this time you have the starter project and has all of this done for you, but you can always come down here and change everything if you wish to do so. That's actually very encouraged in this course. Very good. So all of it is there, and that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to use all of this to add that into our activity main, which you look at this, it has this recycler view added there. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to get rid of all of these, and I'm going to get rid of that as well. So let's go ahead inside of our package there. I'm going to create another package, and this is going to be called adapter. This is that's where we're going to add our recycle view adapter. So I'm going to right click, new Java class, call this recycler view adapter as such. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to extend our recycler view such, and I'm going to go and get adapter, and we are going to pass, of course, our recycler view adapter a class called view holder, which we haven't created yet. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and create the view holder class. There it is, and it will get back to that. And the next thing we need to do is, of course, do some implementation of some methods that are needed when we use a recycle view adapter. So we have the onCreate view holder, onBind view holder, count, and so forth. Now, for our view holder here, because it's also an independent class, it has to extend the recycler view, that view holder class as such, and which means we also create a constructor that matches exactly the view holder. All right, there it is. We'll come back to that, obviously. Okay, so let's go ahead and put together the pieces and bits real quick, so at least we can start seeing things, hopefully, in our user interface. The main thing I'm going to pass here is going to be final. There's going to be a list which will contain task objects. So let's say task list like this. Okay, let's go ahead and import our task there. And of course, it's going to complain because we made this private. That means we have to create a constructor. So I'm going to add constructor in this case and pass that parameter there. All right, so that's all good. Now, okay, so next here, we know that on create a view holder, this is where we create or we inflate our row that will be attached to our recycle view widget. So I'm going to say view because we need to create that view. Say view as such. I'm going to use the layout inflator. It's going to inflate from our parent view group that get context. And then we're going to use inflate r.layout. And I'm going to get the to do row. Okay, it should be task row, but to do row, that's totally fine. Going to pass parent, and we're not going to attach to root, so pass false. All right, now that we have that view, of course, I need to make sure that this is equal to that. Okay, now that we have our view, that's when we're going to say new view holder class at the bottom here, and we're going to pass that view, which is exactly this view we just created there. There we go. Okay, let's go down to our view holder, and this is we're going to be setting up our user interface, because remember we have our view, which we call item view, which is essentially what we are getting from our layout to do row. So we can now invoke that to go and get all of, let's find our to do row as such, to get all of these widgets that are inside there. So let's put a few fields here. The first one, I'm going to say public. I'm going to say app compat radio button. I'm using app compat radio button because that's what we've used. If you go back to our to do row there, this radio button here, let's go to our code. Say public radio button. Now there's two options here. I always like to use the app compat radio button because there's that compatibility component there. That's fine. Call this radio button, and I'm gonna use another public here. This app compat text view. This is our to do. So essentially, I'm pulling in all of these widgets, and that's to do. That's fine. You can call it task to be consistent, I guess. And public, I'm going to go and get the chip, right? It's going to be today chip like this. So we'll need to go ahead and import that. All right. So that means then inside of our constructor here, this is where we have our item view. So the view actually where we can go and find those views. So radio button, I'm going to set it to item view. Notice it has to go through item view because this is what we have set up here to go through the view holder to get our view. Okay. So the idea, we're passing this view through our view holder constructor, which is this view holder constructor there, which essentially we are pulling in again this view that we inflated there. All right, enough of mechanics there. Okay, say. All right, let's go ahead. So dot, and I'm going to say find view by ID, r.id.todo radio button. That's the ID. I'm going to do the same to others. Let's say task item find by ID. I think I call it to do row to do like that. And then today chip item view that find by ID r.id.today chip like this. All right, so now I got a hold of all of those. We are ready to continue. So let's go on bind view holder. So now we're on bind view holder here. It's where we actually bind the views and the data. Okay, so I'm going to say task because I need that object. Say task equal to task list. Remember, we've created this task list here, and we're actually setting up those tasks so that they can receive all of the tasks. That means then we're going to go ahead and get one task at least each time, right? How do we do that? We can say dot get, right, this method, and we can pass the position of the row at this point so we can get the exact task that we want. We're going to pass position, and there we go. So now we have a task object which we can do all sort of things. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just start with adding the text. So I'm going to say holder. Remember, this holder is coming from on bind view. It passes the view holder class, right, object, which is this view holder here, which internally we have these public fields that we can go and fetch, right, those widgets, so we can set them up. Okay, that's beautiful. So I'm going to say holder, say dot, and get to do or task. I call it task text view. I'm going to set a task to what? Oops. A task that's set text like this. I'm going to use the task object we just got and say get task. Okay. For now, I'm going to set up this one before we move forward because there's other things we are going to be doing. Right? And let's not forget that the get count is very important because it needs to know exactly what is the size of this list. So it knows internally how to set up everything and get everything going. So I'm going to go ahead and say again, task list dot size to get the size of the list. All right. And we should be good for now. So let's go back to our main activity. I can just double click shift there and find main activity like that, recent files, enter, and this is what we get. All right. So what do we do? Well, we need to instantiate, first of all, our recycler view. So I'm going to say private, call recycler view, okay, and call this recycler view as such. I'm going to say private. Let's get our recycle view adapter we just created, call recycle view adapter. And of course, inside of our own create, somewhere around there below our task view model. In fact, we can do way before that because we're setting up the widget at first. I'm going to say recycler view, and we're going to go get that recycle view, right? So I'm going to say is equal to find by r.id, call this recycle view. That was the ID we gave, and I'm going to set up the recycle view, right? Say dot set has fixed size to true, just a few things, and then recycle view. I'm going to set layout manager, which is responsible for laying everything out. I want this to be a linear layout manager like that. I'm going to pass this for the context. All right, there we go. So we have our recycle view set up. Next, we need to set up our recycle view adapter, but we're going to do that inside of our Lambda because it's all dependent on the data that's coming in. What I mean by that is as follows. So where we say task view that get all tasks, we have this observe, we pass this, and we have all our tasks. So we know we're getting tasks because we have this for loop there. So I can get rid of that for now because we no longer need that. Here is where I'm going to set up our adapter. So I'm going to say recycler view adapter, say it's equal to new recycler view adapter, remember, and the recycler view adapter, if you remember correctly, it wants us to pass in what? The list of all of the tasks. Makes sense. Where do we get those lists? Well, those are being passed right under our nose. There. All right. And that's it. Next, I'm going to use our recycler view and set adapter. What adapter? Well, the recycle view adapter we just created. And there you have it. So now when we run this app, we hopefully going to be able to see something in our user interface. Let's hope for that at least. Fingers crossed. And just like that, folks, we have things working. So we have this to do, and to do. Not very helpful because, again, remember, all of those are these ones that we've added earlier, and it's not very helpful. So what I can do now, check this out. I can come up here. Let's see, right about here. Instead of to do, I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to change to task, and because I want to make this somewhat customized, I'm going to just pass a counter here. We haven't created this counter. Let's create this counter. Create a field counter. It's going to be a string, actually an int. That's what I meant to say. And when we start, our counter is going to be 0, and each time we click, we're going to go ahead and say ++ like this. Okay, and let's say this to, instead of high, let's say medium priority. Okay, let's go ahead and run real quick. Of course, we're going to see the same thing, but then we're going to be able to hopefully click on the add button and hopefully add a more interesting task. Okay, let's see if this works. Click. And the beauty here, notice the moment we clicked, it was added automatically. And because we are talking about live data, I think this is always important to remember. Live data is real amazing. It gives us this observable and notifies the user interface that, hey, some data was added, something has changed, and go ahead and change the user interface. All of that is happening without us having to do refreshing, do anything else. This is huge. Okay, you should be celebrating about this because this is amazing. All right, so we have a task 0. It's happening there. Look at this. I go next, task 1, incrementing. So these tasks are actually being added into our database and automatically shown there because we have our recycler view working perfectly there. All right, we can keep adding as many as we want. Very good indeed. And we can go to our database inspector there, refresh. You can see we have all of those tasks that are being added, mediums and so forth. Very nice. So at least now we're able to look at something. At least we can see that things are being added and we can retrieve that information, all of the tasks or to-dos and they're shown right here. And even these buttons are working perfectly, even though that's not what we want, but at least we know things are working. And remember, if we go back to our recycle view adapter, those are not set up. The only thing that we populating is just this one field, which is this to do. That's why anything else, it just looks kind of the same. Very well. Well, congratulations. And we're making really good progress. And I want you to spend some time and look at how awesome this is, especially when we talk about room database. And I'm very excited about room database for many reasons that I've shown you, I've shared with you in previous videos, if you've been following us along. And you should be also very excited about it. Good progress, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in the next video. Very well. So far, things are looking really good. And one thing we want to do is let's add the actual due date instead of today, because this is just a placeholder text. Let's see how we do that. So the idea really is going back to our recycle view adapter, scroll down here, we have instead of onBind view holder, so we have the contextual task object that we can use to populate, as you see here. So it's working fine. Now let's go ahead and see if we can add the date, the due date there. But for that, we'll need to, of course, do some conversion. Meaning, if I go ahead and say holder and get the chip date or today date, so this chip here, and I can say something like that, set text. If I set text, I can say task.get due date like this. Now that's a date type. Now I can go ahead and say that to string, and it will give me the string representation. But what I really want to do is I want to be able to format this date so that it looks better, right? So I want to say something like January 12th, that's the due date, instead of having a long date. Okay, so let's separate the concerns here. So let's go ahead and separate the concerns. Let me close this down. And also keep in mind, actually, let's go back to our database inspector. The dates are saved, as you may recall, are saved as Unix timestamp. So it's a long number that we need to translate back into an actual date. First, I'm going to create a string called formatted is equal to utils. We haven't created the utils class yet. We will call format date as such, and then we're going to pass task, the object, and say get due date like this. Obviously, this is not going to work. Let's go ahead and create our class here. Let's create utils class, and this is going to be, say, dot util like this. Okay, that's where we're going to add this new class to. And there we have it. So we have our utils class here, and for our utils class, this is just going to be a simple method that will have functions or methods that will have helper functions or method. The first one is going to be public static, so be a string type, right? Format date. I'm going to pass a date object. That's what's needed. Let's go ahead and import that. There it is. So there are different ways to format dates in Android, but we're going to use the simple date format class. So say simple date format class from Java text. That called the simple date format, and we're going to say simple date format class get date instance like that. Now we're going to have an issue because we have to wrap this around a simple date object. Let's close this down so we have more space, right? So once we have our simple date format object there, we can use it. First of all, we're going to set it up so that we know exactly what patterns we want to show. So what I mean by date pattern is, for instance, we can choose if we want to show something like this, January 30th, something like that. Or we want to also January 30th, 2025. Okay, so we can actually specify that by passing a string. So we say dot apply pattern, right? It's a string pattern, and there are different kinds of string patterns you can use actually to show different date patterns. Okay, so in this case here, you can say EEE, 3 E's, MM for month, and then day, just like that. So this just tells us it's going to show month and day. And then I'm going to say return simple data format. That format, we're going to pass our date that we are receiving from our function. All right, save this. Now we should be able to see that we no longer have an error there. So now that we have this formatted string, that's what we can use to pass it along in our today chip. That way we can get that formatted date. So now if I save this, let's go ahead and run. Hopefully we should see a nicer date, and it's not working. What's going on? Let's click here. Looks like here, holder today chip set formatted on a null object reference. Let's go and check at the bottom. Right, that is the wrong one. This is taking us to our bottom sheet. We actually need to get from our to-do. So that is the problem. This is the correct ID, which is to-do row chip. I was getting the wrong ID. That's why it wasn't accepting. It wasn't accepting that as an actual valid widget. So it has to be the to-do row chip. Okay, that's why I've appended this to-do to know that these IDs from the correct XML. All right, now we should be good. Let's go save and run once again. And there you have it. You can see now it says to do is going to be Tuesday, January 19th. That's yesterday when we added it. If I went ahead and added a new one, let's add something. You can see this one says Wednesday, January 20th. That's what I added today. If I keep adding, see task 1, today's date. All right, so it is indeed working. That's really good. Now, one thing you also notice is that it's cutting off a little bit here our recycle view. So let's see if we can fix that real quick. Let's go to main XML, close this down a little bit. Let's give a padding of this entire recycle view, say padding. So it looks like we already have a padding there. So what we can do, we can say command and click. This will take us to where we have our dimensions. All right, 16 actually works way better. So there we go. Now you don't see that cutting off at all there. Very well, things are looking pretty good. And in this lesson, we created this utils class, which holds this static method called format date. So what it does, it just formats the date so that it looks better like this. And we're using that inside of a recycle view, and we'll make sure to go and get the today chip and set that format date. And this format date is of course coming from our task get due date. Now we're going to look at the bottom sheet fragment, and essentially what that is going to be the little pop-up we're going to see at the bottom of the screen where we're going to be able to add an item, in this case a to-do or a task, to our database. Now, why are we using bottom sheet fragment? We're using bottom sheet fragment because it is another user interface widget in essence that is given to us for us to use, and it makes our application have that feel of a single page application, right? Instead of having a lot of different activities going back and forth, we just feels as if we only using one single view or one single activity. Now, a bottom sheet fragment, as the name implies, it is a fragment. What that means is that when we want to create this bottom sheet fragment, we need to extend a fragment, or in this case, this is going to be a fragment type. Now, what is this fragment? Well, essentially, a fragment is a reusable portion of a user interface. Now, fragments are very special for many reasons, one of which is that they must be hosted by other fragments or activity. So the best way to really understand fragment in general, the usage and the reason why fragments are great, is the ability that they give us to reuse certain components or views of our user interface interchangeably. There's a lot to fragments than what I've just told you. And the other reason why fragments are great is that it allows us to have a very uniform user interface. So imagine that you're building an application that needs to run on Android TVs, need to run on Android tablets and phones and so forth. And also these applications, they need to adapt to changes, right? So if the application is running on a portrait mode or a landscape mode, okay? So it is much easier to use a user interface that is more flexible. In this case, indeed, a fragment will be the best candidate because we can create different kinds of user interfaces using fragments that will be called at runtime depending on the circumstances, whether we're running on a bigger screen, right, a larger screen, or a smaller phone screen, or on a TV and so forth. So there's a lot to fragment that I'm not going to get into right now, but I just want to give you some sort of an overview of what a fragment in essence is and why we're going to be using bottom sheet fragment. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So looking here in our project, when we open our project, you can see that we have our bottom sheet fragment. Double click, you should have this code already, although it's very empty, but you should have everything there. Okay, so there we go. We have bottom sheet fragment and extends bottom sheet dialog fragment. So this is going to be a dialog that pops up and kind of grays out everything behind so that this bottom sheet is the central piece. That's what a dialog in Android is. Okay. So there's different kind of bottom sheet fragments, of course, but this is what we're going to be using. You can see here we have a few methods, and the main method here is the onCreate view. Now you've seen something similar before. If we go back to our adapter, there's a recycle view adapter. Okay, if you go up here, you can see there is this onCreate view holder, which is kind of similar to what we have inside of our onCreate view. Because here, what we're doing, we're inflating, right? Meaning we are getting the layout and inflate it and create an actual view object, which is exactly the same that we had to do before in our recycle view adapter. Okay, we use a layout inflator, we inflate that layout to create an actual view. So that is the similarity there. That means this fragment here, we are going to do the same thing. We're inflating the bottom sheet. Let's go ahead and go to that. This is what we're going to be inflating. Okay, close all of that. We're going to be inflating all of that so that we can actually show in our user interface when we click the add button. All right. And of course, you look at our user interface here. You can see our user interface. We have all these information buttons that I've already created and that I have already created. And you have access to all of these, of course. And it's very simple, really. I've got some drawables, meaning images and icons that I've added as buttons. They all have IDs. And we have this very nice edit text here where we can enter and add the text that we want to save. But most importantly, also, you'll see, let's open this component tree here. Let's hide this around because this is important for you to look at. So also notice why there's a few things that are a little bit strange here in a sense that I've grouped together a few items. Now, if you notice to the right, we have this sign that says something is restrictive or it's invisible. What that means is that this view is gone when we run this app. So if I click on this view and let's look, say visibility, it says it's gone. I'm going to make sure that this is actually visible so you can see what's going on. The moment you do that, you can see now this is what is gone. So the idea is when we first run this app, when we click the button, this shows up. All of these views are going to be invisible at first, and programmatically we're going to make them visible. And within this view, you can see this radio group priority. Okay, I have a few radio buttons here. So these are the radio buttons. And I've added different colors to differentiate them. Okay, that's what we're going to be using in our code. Let me put that back to gone so you don't see it. Very good. And the next thing we have here is the calendar group. So I grouped together some of the widgets that I want to be hidden. Let's go ahead and visibility is gone. I'm going to say invisible again so you can see exactly what's going on. Oh, actually, so this should be visible. There we go. All right, you can see here I have a text view at the top, and I have these chip buttons there, or I made them buttons because we are going to be able to click on them, right? So these are going to be helpful in a sense that, for instance, if I know that this task I want it to be done by tomorrow, I can click just tomorrow, and then in the background, what we're going to do in code, we are going to save that tomorrow in a date format, actually in a Unix timestamp, so that we can save that. So it's much easier as opposed to trying to go through our calendar and find tomorrow. Okay, just the most convenient way to get users to add due dates. There's also next week, and so we do those calculations when they click. We know that this particular task is going to be due next week. Of course, they can do the same thing by adding or by finding in our calendar here. So this is, of course, a calendar view. You can see here, this is the calendar view. It's a widget that comes with the Android SDK that makes it way easier for us to look at a calendar and select the dates and so forth. So we don't have to do much. This comes already pre-packed in Android, which is very, very handy. So this is what we have going on in our bottom sheet. So there's a lot of widgets there and well organized and so forth. Okay, so now that we have all of that, let's see if we can pull all of this in our bottom sheet fragment. Let's go back to our activity. There we go. So that when we click this button here, the add fab there, this bottom sheet is going to pop up and show itself right about there. Okay, all right, let's go and do some work. All right, so here it is. We have on create view. So at this point, it's pretty empty. The good thing is that we're inflating our view. So we're returning our view. And I always like to actually say something like this view and take all of this like that. I think it's the best way to do right now. And then return our view. It's easier that way because you'll see in a bit here, we're going to be using this view object and get things from it and do all sort of things. All right, so by now we have our view, and of course it's going to complain a little bit, give us a warning here because we haven't done anything with our view, but we will, so that's totally fine. So at this point here, when this bottom sheet fragment is called, in our main activity, because that's part of a fragment, is that it has to be hosted somewhere. In this case, we're going to be hosting it on our main activity. What's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and inflate our bottom sheet, this whole thing here. In fact, let me make sure that I have this back to what it was so that it's not visible, so that we don't run into issues. Let's go back to, right, this whole group here has to be invisible or gone, the visibility. Say gone like this. Very good. Go back to that. And so at least, like I said, we're going to be able to see this popping up. Okay, so far it's so good. Let's actually go to main activity and see how can we make that happen. The other thing I need to have here, one of the contracts we have with creating fragments, is that we need to have an empty public constructor. So I'm going to say public. So I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor here like this. So it's just going to be empty, and that's one of the requirements. That's very, very important. All right, so let's go to our main activity here and set things up so at least we can see if we're able to invoke our bottom sheet fragment to show. I'm going to say bottom sheet fragment, call this bottom sheet fragment as such, and then I'm going to instantiate it inside of main on create, that is. So I'm going to say bottom sheet is equal to new bottom sheet like this. Okay, so we have now instantiated our bottom sheet. Next thing we need to do, we need to set up the actual bottom sheet, meaning this whole view here. Because if you look at our bottom sheet XML, you notice that we have this bottom sheet as the ID. Get rid of that. Let's actually go to code. You'll notice that everything is enclosed inside of a constraint layout, and we gave an ID to this constraint layout, which encloses all of the widgets. So one thing we need to do with our bottom sheet is that we need to actually find that layout, the constraint layout, so that we can pass that through our bottom sheet behavior, because all of these bottom sheets, they do have a behavior. You can extend them, you can do all sort of things. Okay, that's one of the requirements we need to do in order for us to have a complete bottom sheet. So I'm going to create a constraint type here, constraint layout. Okay, and then call this constraint layout. I'm going to say is equal to find by ID r.id.bottom sheet. So again, we are getting this constraint layout, which is our entire bottom sheet. Okay, so once I have that, then I can invoke the bottom sheet behavior as such. In this bottom sheet behavior, we have to pass the type that is containing, which is going to be a constraint layout. Okay, and then I'm going to say bottom sheet behavior. It's going to be equal, set that to bottom sheet behavior like that, say from, and then we're going to pass our constraint layout that we passed there. So now we have our bottom sheet behavior. We can set up to what kind of behavior we want this to have. Okay, so in this case here, I can pass all sort of behaviors. So we're not interested in going through all these different behaviors. We want to make sure though that the peak height, right, the highest extent of our bottom sheet, we want to make sure that this is actually stays hidden. Okay, so now I can say bottom sheet behavior, and I'm going to say dot set peak height. So if you notice, there's a lot of things we can set on our bottom sheet behavior here. Okay, so what we want to do here, set the peak height. We want to make sure that we can set to something that we can use. So I'm going to say set peak height, and in this case here, I want this state to be hidden. So all the time when this starts, when we run this, the state's going to be hidden, which means the bottom sheet is always going to be hidden, not extended, always hidden. So for that, I can just say state, start typing state, and you can see bottom sheet has a few fields that are static that I can use. So I want the hidden like that. Okay, so we're setting up our bottom sheet behavior. All right, very good. So when do you want to see our bottom sheet? Well, what we want to do is we want to make sure that that happens when we click on the Fab button. So we can go ahead and just comment all of this out as such for now, because we know that all works. And I'm going to call here something like this, show bottom sheet dialog as such. We haven't created that. I'm going to create it right now. All right, so what do we do to show our bottom sheet? Well, here all I'm going to do, I'm going to say bottom sheet fragment, because remember we have instantiated our bottom sheet already at the top here. Okay, I'm going to use that instantiation. I'm going to say dot show, and in order to show that, I have to go to say get support fragment manager. So the fragment manager is going to know exactly if we have multiple fragments. It will know exactly all about the fragments that you have in your project, and will know how to make all of that actually work for us. Okay, so it's manager will manage the actual fragment, so we don't have to worry about anything. All right, that's the first argument we need to pass. And the next one is going to be the actual bottom sheet fragment tag. So I'm going to say bottom sheet dot tags. So the tag, the get tag essentially is an ID, underlying ID that is given to every fragment we create. Okay, so this here will go ahead and show our fragment if all goes well. So that's why we're calling that inside of on click of our fab button. All right, let's save this and run. Okay, let's see if this works. Click, and voila, you can see we have indeed our bottom sheet fragment working there. And the great thing about this is that we're given a lot of features. So now to get rid of that, I can just click anywhere outside, it goes away. We didn't have to write code that does that for us, right? So it comes all prepackaged because it is indeed a dialog. So that means when we click somewhere out of our fragment here, our bottom sheet, it knows that you need to get out of it. Very handy. And notice here how it darkens anything else beyond what we have in our bottom sheet here to signify this is where the attention should go to as users use this application. And here you can click and start adding things and go from there. Okay, can get rid of that and voila. Very good. So we're able to show our bottom sheet dialog. Of course, it doesn't do anything because we haven't really written any code that will make our widgets inside of our bottom sheet dialog. For instance, we have this calendar, we have all of these other buttons. So we haven't set them up yet, which we're going to be doing in the next videos. Now we're going to set up all of these widgets inside of our fragment, or in this case, bottom sheet fragment. So again, the important place here is the view on create view, right? Because this is where we are inflating or getting our layout bottom sheet that we passed here and make that an actual object, which we can actually use to invoke or get, as I've said before, get all of these widgets that may be inside of our bottom sheet. All right, so how do we do that? You've seen this before. It's very easy. We have our view, so that we can go through this view to set up our widgets. So the first widget I want to go and get. Let's go back here. Now remember, there's a few widgets that are hidden, but we will get to those a little bit later. So let's start with our edit text there. We know this, the ID is entered to do ET for edit text. So we can start from there. So I'm going to create instance variables here. I think it's better. I'm going to say private edit text like this. Call this enter to do. And I'm going to say private. Call this image button, calendar button. So another private here. The image button. This is going to priority button, say private radio group, priority radio group. Now I'm going to get the radio button, say selected radio button. These are all for some of the ones that we don't see. They're kind of hidden. All of these radio buttons there. That's what we're doing there. And then private int selected. This will make sense once we actually are working with these buttons. And let's get a private image button, and this is going to be save button like this. Let's say private calendar view, because we have that calendar view as such. Calendar view, that's image button, that's what I'm looking for. Let's say save button. And then you can see that I've actually created, you can see at the bottom here, I did create that calendar group ID. This is the one that is hidden or invisible, gone, that contains all of these other buttons, right? Remember the next week, today, and tomorrow. Okay? So I put all of that in a widget called group because you can actually group together certain widgets. So I did this because it's easier for me to just toggle that group for everything inside of that group to be either hidden or invisible, etc. Okay, and that's in itself, it's a widget, a group widget. That's why it says calendar underscore group. There we go. So I'm gonna get that too because we're gonna use that to show or to actually make it visible or invisible depending on the case. So I'm gonna say group, make sure we're getting the group Android constraint layout like this, and say calendar group. All right, so we have all of those instance variables, so fields that we can actually use now here. Okay, so first I'm going to say start with calendar group as such and say view. Have to go through our view and find by r.id.calendar group like that. Okay, so now I have retrieved this calendar group. I have a hold of it. And then calendar view, view.find by.id, calendar view, calendar button, same thing. called today calendar button. That was the title or ID. And then enter do the edit text view by, say find by, that is r.id, enter to do. This is very boring. I do realize you can always fast forward. Okay, save button, view, find by, r.id, that save to do button, priority, button, view, find by, r.id, that to do button, priority to do button. There it is. And last but not least, priority and next priority radio group is equal view, find, r.id, that radio group, priority. Very well. Now, the reason why I made all of these fields of this class is because I want to be able to use them somewhere else or anywhere else in this class. Now, there we have other widgets that we don't see here. Specifically, we have this calendar. So inside of our calendar group here, we have other widgets, like I showed you before. So we have this next week chip, tomorrow chip, and today chip. These are the main widgets that we also need to pull them through. Now, because I won't be using them throughout this entire class, so I don't need to put them as fields or instance variables. So I can just instantiate them inside here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to say chip. Okay, make sure we get the chip from material, Android there. Say today chip, use a view, find by r.id, that today chip. Okay, and then again, I'm going to say chip, tomorrow chip. Okay, these are going to be buttons. Okay. Find by r.id, that tomorrow chip. And then the last one, chip. This is going to be next week chip, view, that find by r.id, that next week. All right, so we got that out of the way. I know it's very tedious, but we kind of have to do this. So we have everything set up and ready to go. So the first thing we want to do really is to make sure that we're able to pull or get information from our view, or in this case our widget, the enter to do, right? To get that information and save it, because prior to that we're doing all of this here, which essentially it's fine, but that's not the goal. The goal here is that when we click, as you see, we show the bottom sheet dialog, and the bottom sheet dialog will take care of saving everything for us. That's why we are pulling in this enter to do widget, that it's an edit text so that we can get that information. So really what we're going to do is, remember we are inside of onCreateView, and then we have another method here called onViewCreated. This is called, as the name implies, the moment that the view is created, everything is set up. So we have set up all of our widgets and everything is good. That's when this onViewCreated is called. So this would be the best place for us to start doing things like fetching information from our views and do all sort of things, okay? So in this case here, all I'm going to do, because I know that I have this save button there. So what is this save button again? It's going to be this save button here, assuming that our bottom sheet is up. So it's been shown. We want users to add something and then hit this and then save that information. So let's see how can we do that real quick. So again, I'm going to be inside on view created, because the view at this point, this is going to be called when the view is already created, meaning all of this is set up. So all of these widgets are ready to actually be used. So here, I'm going to just go ahead and say something like this. Enter to do. Now you understand why I made sure that some of these widgets are part of the class fields as opposed to inner fields, because we want to be able to use them or get a hold of them anywhere from anywhere. All right, in this case, actually it's not enter to do. Rather, I'm going to say save button, image button here, that's set on click listener, new on click listener. And we know about Lambda here to make our lives much simpler. And there we go. So what we're going to do here, well, we need to extract what we will get from our edit text, which is this enter to do et there, right? Which is our enter to do. Okay, well, I'm going to put on a string. It's a string, call this task is equal to enter to do dot get text. Such, I'm going to go ahead and say to string and then use the trim to get rid of all the unnecessary spaces. And then I'm going to say if, okay, I'm going to use the text utils, okay, class, text utils class that is empty. In this case, if it's not empty, because we have the not there, okay, pass the task if that string is not empty, okay, for now. And then I'm going to say if that's true, then we're ready to rock and roll, which means that I'm going to create a task object, call this my task. Let's import our task class there. I'm going to set it to new task, and I'm going to use that constructor to construct a task. So I'm going to pass our task string, this one here, okay, because it's not empty at this point. I'm going to pass priority. The priority for now, I'm just going to go ahead and say priority high, because everything is priority high. All right, and then I'm going to pass due date. I'm just going to go ahead and use the calendar object again, Java util .get instance .get time. That's fine, and then do the same again for the other kind, get time. Okay, for I think this is going to be the enter or the date created, that is. All right, and then I'm going to say false for is done. And there you have it. So we've created, again, something similar that we had before. We've created a new task here object. So now it's time for us to do what? To, well, insert that task. Look how convenient this is. I can go ahead and say the ViewModel, okay, remember our task ViewModel class, and invoke the insert method, which remember is a static method. That's why we're able to say task ViewModel dot and invoke the insert method. And it needs, yes, a task object. All right, so it looks like we have, oh, not task, that has to be my task. There we go. We were having an issue when we use just the task because it's going to say, well, this is a string and insert requires an actual task object. All right, and we have it. There it is. Let's see if this works, right? So at this point, we're going to be able to have a semi-customized task. Let's save and go ahead and run. Okay, let's try. Works perfectly. Let's go ahead and say something. Eat less every day. Okay, enter like this, and let's click on this save button. This is a button actually, so click if that's true, get rid of that, and we should see that we have there eat less every day. Very good, it is working. So we're able to pull in the information we get from our edit text from our bottom sheet there, and we're able to save that information into our database. Very good. So it is indeed working. Obviously, if you go to our database here, let's go ahead and refresh. We should be able to see, there it is, eat less, very high, and we have our due date and created that. And it's done. Of course, it's a Boolean 0 to say that this is indeed false, which means it's not done. If it was true, this would have been 1. Okay, so it is working.
Hello there, I'm sorry to interrupt for a second here. I hope you're enjoying this course, this mini course, and I hope you're finding it very helpful. I just want to let you know that if you want to learn more about Android development, I'm talking about from not knowing anything to actually build applications such as the one that you are following along and building. I have a course on Udemy. It's exclusively on Udemy, and I'm actually putting it out there at a huge discount. So if you go click on the link below in the description, there's a link, you click on that, that will take you to this full course. Now the course is loaded with a lot of information. Right now is about 46 or 48 hours of content, so it's a lot of content. Of course, you don't have to watch it in one sitting, obviously, but as you see, it's the most comprehensive course on Udemy on the topic of Android development. And I've just updated the course as well, so you will get the fresh, the newer information, the newer tools that you need to build Android applications. Okay, so there's a link below. Go ahead and enroll in the course if you want to get more than just this mini course as you see here. But let's go back to coding.
Now let's look at this calendar button here, because when we click on this button, we want to be able to show the rest of the calendar view. But we also want to be able to show the next week, tomorrow, today, and so forth. Okay, so all of these hidden group. All right, let's go ahead and see how we do that. So we have our save button. We still, instead of on view created. Next, let's go and get the calendar button. There it is. When I say dot set on click listener, new on click listener such, and let's make this lambda. Let's close this down for more space. Okay, so here what we need to do again is to make sure that this calendar view is visible, but it has to be depending on the situation. So what I want to do is if you click first the first time, if it's invisible, of course it's going to become visible. And if you click again, we want to hide it. Okay, so we're going to create some sort of a toggle functionality here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the calendar group because we created that, right? We got it instantiated and everything. So calendar group, I'm going to invoke the dot set visibility. And for that, I need to pass, of course, the state. Okay. Now again, because I want it to be a toggle situation, meaning depending on the situation, it's going to be visible. Otherwise, it's going to be closed when we click, right? So I'm going to use a ternary operator here. I'm going to say calendar group, this group that I'm talking about. I'm going to say get visibility. Okay, there is that method which returns true or false. So in this case here, let me go ahead and put a new line so we have the full picture. So in this case, what I'm going to do is going to say if that is true, meaning if the view is gone indeed, right, then I want to make sure that I set the view to visible because that's going to be the whole idea. Again, so if the view is gone and I click, then we're going to show it. If I click again, I want to hide it. So that's what I'm doing it. And then I'm going to say else with colon like this. I'm going to say gone like that. Okay, that's it. So now if I run this, I should hopefully get the results I'm looking for. All right, let's click there to open our sheet. Click. Aha. And voila, just like that, you can see now the whole view is showing. If I click back, it hides like this. And now that it's kind of extended, I can also pull it up so you can see the entire calendar and other views or other widgets that we have there. So all of these are visible now. And I can go through all of these months and I can also click and find the date. All of that is given to us. So the next thing we need to do really is to make sure that at least we have this calendar working, meaning when we click, we can then retrieve the date of the month, the year, and whatever else that we want. Okay? Click out of that and there we go. So how do we do that? So we have the calendar view. So it turns out the calendar view, which we already have set up, so I'm going to say calendar view. Notice it is indeed of type calendar view. I can say dot set on data change listener. And then I'm going to pass here on calendar view data change listener like this and enter. And this is what we have. And of course, we can always use our Lambda. It's always way easier. And of course, it gives us this very not interesting parameters here that are being passed. That's fine. I know exactly which one are they. The first one is going to be the calendar view. And the second one is going to be the year. And I'm going to just type it out. And then the month. And then the day of month. And I can see that by putting something like a log D, like this. Let's just say cal, something like this. And I can say month like that. I can say plus, let's put month like this. And then I want day of month like that. And I'm going to say day of month like that. So we could put a year, but this is fine. All right, so that means then if we click on any of those dates, right, we are going to be able to get the full date as we see here. Let's go ahead and run and see. Let's open our logcat, make sure that it is indeed cal like this. Make it a little bit larger. Okay, let's test. There's the calendar. I can pull it up a little bit and I'm going to say 14th. When we do that, you don't see much right here, but if we go to run sometimes, we should be able to see, let's say cal. Okay, let's go ahead and run. Click. Let's go ahead and just click somewhere. Say click. And let's just click one of these dates. And you can see it says month 0, day of month is 1. That's what we'll click. Click the second one. And there we go. But why is it saying month 0? Well, the reason why is because in the calendar, everything starts counting by 0. So the first month is January and it's going to be 0, which is not necessarily helpful for us. That's why we must actually say +1. So this month here, I'm going to put it inside of parentheses. We're going to say +1 like this to say that we're going to start always, instead of 0, it's going to go to 1, which is the correct one for us to see January. Let's run this one more time. Logcat. Let's open there. Another month. Just click. You can see month 2. That's February, day 3. Make this a little bit bigger, perhaps. Okay, there it is. So this is February. Let's go to March. Okay, month 3, day 4. If I go to 6, there we go. So every other month that we go to, it's going to happen. Let's see. And voila, it's working. June is indeed month 6, day 3. That's the one that we selected. Very good. So we're getting the right information, which is really good. So now that we know that we are getting the correct dates and everything, we need to then take this date. So inside here, we want to take that information. So when we click on this date, wherever we go, we want to be able to take that date object so that we can actually pass onto our to-do, our task, right? Makes sense because we need that information for our due date. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to think about is, okay, where do we set up that due date? Well, first of all, we understand also, go back to our app here, that the due date can be taken or can be retrieved from different places, because we can also not only get from our calendar view, as you see here, but we can also get that from these other buttons, which we're going to look at next. Okay, so it's important for us to create a variable, an instance variable at the top here, a date type. I'm going to say private. It's a date. Make sure it is indeed a Java util date. Okay, I'm going to say due date as such. So we can set that up anywhere we want and retrieve that whenever we need that. So we can set this due date anywhere we want. Could be inside of our calendar group, could be inside of our calendar view, or when we click either today, tomorrow, and next week. Does it make sense? So let's start with our calendar here. This is the important part, so far at least. So the first thing we need to do here is that we need to create the actual date object, which will then set to our date here. Now, how do we get a date object, or how to create a date such as today or tomorrow, etc.? For that, there is a calendar class that we can instantiate. So I'm going to say calendar. Look at this. This is calendar from java.util. Okay, so it's not just related to Android, it's related to Java in general. So we can use that. I'm going to call this calendar. I'm going to just go ahead and instantiate it right away. I'm going to say calendar.getInstance. So this will give us a general calendar that will have the times, the dates, and so forth. That's what we're going to be using to create the actual date, or extrapolate the date from our calendar view and then transform that into an actual due date, which then we're going to be passing to our database. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, again, we're now inside of the set on data change listener. I'm going to say calendar. The first thing you want to do, remember, it's a calendar class. I'm going to go ahead and say clear, just to make sure that we have a clean slate. And then I'm going to say calendar.set the time and year, in this case, the actual date. Where do we get this date from? Well, we get from our year, month, and day off. And you can see here all these ints that we're supposed to enter. So there's a year, month, and a date. So in this case, day of the month. Very good. So we have that information already. So what I do, I say pass year, month, day of month. And voila. Now a calendar now has all the information it needs to formulate to create an actual date, which means now I can say due date and set that to our calendar that we just set up, say dot get time. So now we're going to have the actual date, due date that we need. Make sense? So since we have our due date at this point here, I can come back to our save here, right? Right now we are hard coding everything. For our due date, I can go ahead and say pass the due date like this, and I'm able to get the due date just like that because remember I made it an instance variable of this class. Very nice. Now, to make sure that this doesn't crash, we can also make this even better before we save our task. I can say, well, the task should not be empty and due date should not be null for this to work. Okay, so we pass due date and the date created is still this generic now, which makes sense because the moment we save this, we're going to pass the instant when this item or this to do was created, which is exactly what we want. So that's totally fine. But the due date now depends on what we chose. All right, let's see. Let's save this, run. All right, moment of truth. Let's go ahead and I'm going to say newest item. And then I'm going to click on the date button or the calendar. And I'm going to just say on the second. It's highlighted. I'm going to save. It's saved, believe me. I'm going to just go down here, get rid of that, and go there. And newest item, Saturday, January 2nd. All right. Very good. So it is indeed saving, and when it saves, it goes back. Of course, we are retrieving all this information from our database. It goes and fetches all that data, the item that we've added, and of course the actual date, and formats everything and shows there. How cool is that? All right, and there we have it. It is indeed working. So now it's really easy because we have, again, this due date as an instance variable of this entire class, which means we can set it up with anything else that we have here. In this case, let's click done again here. I can go ahead and click our calendar and extend that, and then we have these 3 buttons that we can set up. And then if you click today, then the due date is going to be today. So we're going to transform that today into something that can be passed into our table, which then we're going to save that. And that is what we're going to be doing in the next video. The other thing also, you notice that the toggling actually works here. If I go like this, notice now that the calendar group is hidden. Click again, it's showing. All right, very good. I'll see you in the next video. Now we are going to look at the chips. These are, let's click here. You can see if, let's add something, gibberish here. And then if you go to calendar, we are going to set up this today, tomorrow, and next chips. So these will represent dates like today, tomorrow, and next week. So these will simplify, give a user a more direct way to set up today, tomorrow, or next week for the task at hand. Okay, very well. So I'm going to get rid of that. We do have the setup, the chips set up here. We are now going to attach on-click listener to each one of them. To simplify our lives, I'm going to make sure that this entire class, this entire bottom sheet fragment, implements on-click listener. So on-click listener as such, on-click listener. There we go, which means then we have to implement a few methods, namely the on-click method there. Okay, just a simple way to deal with this. So in this case here, for each one of these, I'm going to say today chip.set on click listener, and I'm going to pass this to say that it's going to be looking at this on click listener, register to this on click listener that we're implementing, which means then we can retrieve or set up the events inside of on click here. Do the same to others. Tomorrow listener, pass this. Next week on click listener, pass this as well. All right, now that we have those, we can come down here, inside of on-click view. This is where we're going to look at each ID that we are getting so that we know exactly which one is being clicked. So I'm going to say int ID set to view.getID. So I'm going to put an if statement here. Let's say if ID is equal to r.id.today chip, like that. So if that is the case, when we click on today chip, what we want to do is set the date for, yes, today. How do we do that? Well, we can use the calendar object. And so to get today, as in when we click for today, the current day, what we can do is we can use calendar Java util as such, and then say day of year. So this gives us the day of the year as in today. And then we're going to pass 0 for the next pass 0 for the next parameter. Okay, and then since now we have the today date, what we need to do is we're going to set that to our due date. I'm going to say due date is going to be equal to calendar again dot get time. So now we're passing the current day today to our due date. Again, keep in mind this due date, it is indeed what is needed when we save our to do or task. You see, we have this to do or due date, I should say. Very nice. And because, again, we made it an instance variable for the entire class, it's at the top here, it's going to be recognized we can use throughout this class, and we can set it anywhere we want in this class. That's why we put it as an instance variable. Okay, so do the same thing because we have other buttons here. I'm going to say else if ID is r.id.tomorrow chip, that is the one clicked, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to just copy all of this. Okay. Now the idea here is that I want tomorrow up to here. This is today. So to get tomorrow, we add 1 to say that we want to add today plus 1 is going to be tomorrow. That's why we pass 1. And then due date again, calendar get time, it's going to get tomorrow date. So if today is the 12th, tomorrow is going to be the 13th. That's why we add the 1. All right. And our final one here, else if ID is equal to r.id.next week chip like this. If that's the case, we're going to do the same thing, but now day of year, it's going to be plus 7, right? Because it's going to be 7 days from today. It makes sense. That's why we pass 7 there, because up to here, it's just today.
7 days from now is going to be next week. And to do the same thing, due date, calendar, get time. Let's go ahead and put a few logs here. Log D. Let's say due date dot toString like this. And let's say this is going to be time. Okay, I'm going to copy this. That way when we click, we can see that indeed we're getting the correct dates. Let's open our logcat. Time. Okay, let's see. Let's pretend that we want to add something and get our date. Click today. Today is this date, January 21st. Very good. So tomorrow should be the 22nd. That's very good. And next week should be what? The 29th. So we're getting the correct dates when we click all of these. So this is good because now the due date is going to be automatically be attached to the current task, which is exactly what we want. Because if you go back then here, the save button is going to have the due date. It's not supposed to be null, and we're going to get that due date depending on the circumstances. Be well, and I'm going to say tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be January 22nd. Next week, the 29th. Okay, and go ahead and save. I should be able to see be well 29th. So make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Be well on the 29th. So it's working perfectly. If I can go ahead and add maybe something new, another task, and I go to calendar, and I want to actually use the calendar. So I can pull this up like that, and I want to say this is going to be a little bit farther out in my schedule. How about the 16th April? And then save. You can see we should have another task, Friday, April the 16th. All right, so it's working. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go back to our recycle view adapter, because that's where we actually see our rows being created in our recycle view and so forth. Now, the idea here is very simple, is that we want to make sure we put together a way of responding to the onClick event for each row. And for that, we're going to use an interface class, because that will give us the flexibility we need to pass around that onClick object throughout the application. So ideally, what we want to be able to do is to be able to click each row, and then when that row is clicked, we are able to actually pop up the bottom sheet fragment with an object that was clicked. Okay, so for that, we'll need a few things. First of all, we need to pass the current clicked object to the bottom sheet, because remember, these are two entities. The bottom sheet is a fragment, and what we're showing to the user, in this case, our recycle view adapter and so forth, all of that is hosted inside of an activity. Okay, so this activity is also hosting the bottom sheet fragment. So we need to pass that current clicked object to the bottom sheet, from activity to the bottom sheet. And once we do that, once we have that object clicked, right, the actual task, we're going to allow users to edit that task and then save the changes. In this case, we're going to update that task. So that is the main goal. But first, of course, we're going to start small. So really, we want to make sure that we are able to click on that row and see something, right? And to do that, we are going to create that onClick interface class that we talked about. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first let's go and open our project tab. Let's go to our recycle view adapter. So this is where all the fun really begins. The idea again is very simple. We want to make sure that we click on our button. Let's go back to our bottom. We click on a row. In this case, let's go to our row, to do row like such. We want to be able to click this row and see if we can pull in some information, or at least see that we are able to invoke and capture the click event of that row. All right, so we're going to go to our recycle view. Let me go ahead and get rid of all other classes here that you probably don't need for now. Now, how are we going to do this? If you've been following us along, you will recognize that we've had this issue, or at least this situation before. It's really easy. We could have said something like this. Well, we know that this item view indeed is this entire row already inflated. We could have just go ahead and say something like this at the bottom here. Say item view.set onClick listener and go from there. But we're not going to do that because we want to do things the right way. That's why we're going to use an interface to delegate this task of onClick event. So for that, I'm going to go open again our project. Inside of our adapter here, I'm going to right click and say new Java class. This is going to be an interface. So I'm going to call this onToDo click listener.
a rather long name, but it's very descriptive and we're happy about that. Okay, as we know, an interface must have, of course, methods without a body because they will be implemented at a class level. That's the whole idea. So I'm going to say void on to do click as such. Okay, but there are a few things we need to think about. So when on to do click is implemented at a class level, doesn't matter where, right? What we want to do is we want to be able to pass the position of that row that was clicked. That's very important. So I'm going to say int. I could say adapter position, okay, like that. And if I want also, I can say I'm going to pass a task object along. Let's go ahead and import our task like this. All right. Now, where are we going to implement this on to do click? All right. Let's go back to our recycle view adapter. For all of this to work, we need to pass along our on to do click listener when we create our recycle view adapter, because remember that the row we are talking about is part of the recycle view adapter. In fact, this is what we're doing here, right? We're using our layout inflator to inflate the to do row to make that a view, an object, which we pass through our view holder class at the bottom here. Okay, very good. So that means then we are going to create here a field of on to do click listener so we can pass it around. So I'm going to say private, make this final because we're going to actually pass it through our constructor here. And I'm going to say on to do click listener. There we go, call to do click listener as such. So you can see again, it's going to complain because we need to pass that, initialize that in our constructor. So we're going to pass it along as well, the on to do click listener, on to do click listener, so that inside here I can go ahead and say on to do click listen like this. So I'm going to say actually this to signify that we're setting up this to do click listener at the top here to whatever we're going to be passing there. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to go down here to the view holder class. There it is, our view holder class. We need to do a few things here. First of all, this is where we have again our item view, which is indeed this whole view that we're inflating, right? So what we're going to do actually here is, first of all, we're going to make this class implement the on-click listener. This is not our on-click listener. This is the on-click listener that comes with the SDK. Makes sense? Because we still need to listen to the on-click event of that row. And naturally, we need to implement the methods, which is on-click inside here, all right? But this is not where we stop. Because think about it, inside of our view holder here, we have this on click. So we have all these views. We can attach all these views to this on click listener. But what we really want to do is that to pass along information onto the on to do click listener. So our on click listener, which you remember, will have this on to do click, and we're going to be able to pass adapter position and a task if we need to do so. So that means then inside of our view holder class here, we need also be able to pass the on to do click listener. So I'm going to say on to do click listener, on to do click listener like that. Now, where do we set this up? Well, inside of our view holder constructor, because this is where we're setting everything up, the widgets, radio button, the task view, and the chip. This is where we're going to set up our on to do click listener as well. So I'm going to say this dot on to do click listener. I'm talking about this one here we're passing there. It's going to be set up to what? It's going to be set up to the to do click listener. If you highlight that, you're going to see what is going to be highlighted is indeed and put a semicolon like that. So this to do click listener, if you command and click, is going to go ahead and point to the class level, this main class level to do listener there. All right. Very good. So that is set up for us. So now our on to do click listener is set up. It should work fine. All right, there it is. Now the next thing we need to do, of course, let's set up the view, this view here. So make sure that when this is clicked, something happens. We can do that by doing the following. In fact, this is the way I started this video by saying this is not how we should do it, right? By saying item view dot set on click listener as such and passing the new on click listener. So this is okay as long as we're not doing something like this, new on click listener, and then do the code that we need here, right? This is not what we want. You will see in a second here. So in fact, I'm going to pass what here? Well, because I know that this class here, meaning this view holder, implements the view on click listener,
right? So I can just pass this to say that this is going to be actually connected, register to our on-click listener. Okay, so we want to retrieve, we want to keep track of those events that we get when we tap or click on this view row. Very well. But now what really needs to happen? Well, when this row is clicked, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we receive that event and pass the information we want. What does that mean? Well, it means the following. In this case here, I'm going to just put int ID. The reason I'm doing this is because we're going to have different views that we're going to be clicking, right? So I'm going to just put the ID inside of a variable. So I'm going to say view.get ID. So I know exactly which view is being clicked. Again, so far we only have one item that we're setting on click listener, but we're going to have another one. So it's nice to have those IDs so we can choose which one was clicked. Then I'm going to say if ID, right, is equal to r.id.todo row layout, meaning this whole layout here, see, to do row layout, that's the ID, this whole thing, anywhere, if this is clicked, then we're gonna respond to that, right? How do we respond to that click? Well, this is where we use the onToDo click listener and set up the onToDo click. Meaning this is where we're going to pass the information we need so that the interface can delegate that information to whoever is going to be implementing this method. This is what I mean. In this case here, I'm going to say onToDo click listener and say dot onToDo click. Look at this. And then I need to pass what? I said we need to pass the adapter position. How do we get an adapter position? Meaning knowing exactly that this is the row, number, or index that we're clicking. Because we're inside of a recycle view adapter, ladies and gentlemen, we can go ahead and say get adapter position as such. And also is expecting another argument here, which is a task object. Well, I can say here cur task like this. We haven't created that. Well, I can create that task. How? Well, I'm going to say task, current task is going to be equal to task list that we have in our, or we created, I should say, here, the task list. And inside here, we're populating the task list with whatever we are getting when we instantiate our recycle view adapter. So this task list at this point should have a list of tasks from our database. Okay, so we're going to use it to say dot get and pass what? The get adapter position as such to get that object. Now, you could say, well, because we are passing the get adapter position, once we get that adapter position, we can go wherever we're going, we can actually invoke that and get or do something similar like this and get the actual object. Why are we passing this object? It's okay at this point. You will see later why we even passing that object instead of just stopping here at the get adapter position. Because with the adapter position, the position of the element, we can always infer and get the object as you see here, all right? And there you have it. So now what's happening is, this is very important to understand because it's a little bit of work and we can start feeling the pain, why we're working so hard for something that we could have done the other way around, which is the easiest way and actually the wrong way of doing this, right? So what's happening here, again, is very simple. We created this onToDo click listener and then we created this void onToDo click, which requires us to pass adapter position and task. This is an interface. Right? So what we do then in our recycle view, because that is what governs everything, that's where we have our recycle view, right? As well as our row. So we can then attach in each of the rows inside of our view holder, we are attaching a click listener. This is a normal click listener, just so as you see here, view that on click listener. We know this. However, when we want to override the on click event, right? Because on click listener, you have to override this onClick method there. That's where we then invoke the onToDo click listener, our own click listener we created, and pass the adapter position, current position of the row that was clicked, and of course the current object that was clicked, right? This is really beautiful. That means any class that will be implementing this onToDo click listener will have the correct position of our object, of our row, and the correct task object, just from clicking, right? Check this out. Now if we go to our main activity, and we go at the top, extends app compact, and we are going to say implements, look at this, on to do click listener. If you do that, as you know, we are now forced to implement methods. In this case, just one method. Look at this. We have on to do click. There it is. That's what we want. If you just click like that and look at that. Now, since we're implementing that on to do click, right? This one here, which incidentally, this is one we're passing. We're passing the get adapter position and the current object. Now we have access to the adapter position and the task, right? Look at this. I can say log D, and right now, let's say I want to just show the position. I'm going to say adapter position to show you that indeed this works. For the tag, let's just put something more exciting. I'm going to say item. For the tag, let's say click, like this. All right, moment of truth. Is this going to work? Looks like I'm having issues. There's the problem. Very well, this is good. Well, what's going on here? Well, it turns out our recycle view is complaining because we changed a few things in our recycle view. Remember? Look at this. In our recycle view adapter now, we have 2 parameters instead of 1. We have this on to do click listener and of course the task list. That has changed. And also the order in which we add these is very important. That means then, let's go back to our main activity here. This no longer will work because we first need to pass something. The first thing we need to pass is the tasks, of course, and then we need to pass this to signify, look at this, this signifies the on to do click listener. The reason why we just can't pass this is because, remember again, the entire class implements on to do click listener. So when we say this, as you see here, our ID tells us exactly what this means. It means on to do click listener. So we're registering our on to do click listeners within our recycle view adapter. So now it should work because it's going to go ahead and listen to this on to do click listener and run this. Very good. So let's run this and see. So each time we click, we should see the adapter position of each row that we click. So click this one. You didn't see anything, but let's go to our logcat. I think I say click. Look, on to do click. That was 0 was clicked. I'm going to click again. 0 was clicked. Row 1, because remember the IDs or positions starts are 0, right? Just like an array. And this one here, 3, I can go all the way to the bottom. Let's see more. That one looks like it's number 14, and it's working. With that, I can also, because we're passing the task here object, it should be an actual object. So I can say task. Let's get the actual task. How is that going to work? Let's run. Shift plus F10 for Windows. Let's look at the bottom here. I'm going to click. To do was clicked. I have a lot of to do. So let's go ahead and find task 0. Look at that. The correct row is showing task 1. Let's go all the way to the bottom. Another task. Click that. And you can see another task is working. All right. So our system is indeed working. What we set up is working. And this is beneficial to us because now we are decoupling our code in such a way is better and maintainable. And this is the recommended way to always use interfaces whenever you want to pass around click events. Very, very important. And again, I understand it's a little bit of work, but we must do some work to get good results. To write good code, it requires a little bit of work. But most importantly, I want you to start thinking in those terms instead of thinking, well, it's a lot of work. Why am I doing this? You're doing this because you want to create solid applications that not only run, but they actually run well and they're well constructed. All right, very good. So we're making progress in that we're able to click on one item and get that object and so forth. The beauty here is that we can do all sort of things now, right? Imagine that you want, for instance, to pass this object onto the next screen. Let's say when we click any of these rows, we want to go to a different screen. Well, it's very easy now because we can just pass this object or parts of this object, or we can just pass this adapter position. And when we get there, we can then show this task object and do all sort of things. All right. So our strategy is going to be different from that, as I have explained earlier, is that we're actually going to figure out a way to pass this data back. Because remember, we are inside of an activity which hosts a fragment, right? We can see it here, but when we click there, you can see that fragment is hosted there. So we want to be able to, when we click eat less every day, then we're going to be able to send over all that information onto this fragment here so we can edit that. All right, so, okay, making good progress. Let's continue in the next video. So next, we are going to continue with sort of our recycle view adapter because look what we did. So I said earlier that the reason why we extracting the ID and check for IDs before we do anything in our own click is because we will have the opportunity to attach another widget to the set on click listener. So now is the time. What widget we want? We want this radio button. Why? Because this radio button here is what we want to make sure that when clicked, we are going to delete to say that this indeed is checked. We've done this task, so we are going to move on with our lives. All right, so naturally we'll have to say something like this: radio button, I'm going to set on click listener again and pass this. Okay, very well. That means then we are going to put another else if here, if ID is equal to r.id.todo radio button. Okay, if that's the case, then we're going to do something else. Now, what is that we're going to do? Well, we still want to do the same thing we did with onToDo click, right? Because the mechanics are going to be still the same. We want to be able to pass along information about this particular row that was clicked, but more specifically, the radio button that was clicked. So we need to go back to our onToDo click listener because we can add as many methods as we want here. So I'm going to say void to differentiate. I'm going to say onToDo radio button click like this. And for this one, I'm just going to say int adapter position. That's all. Okay. All right, so back to our recycle view. I'm going to go ahead and say, again, same thing, onToDo click listener dot onToDo radio button click and pass, of course, our get adapter position just like that. Now, because I know that onToDo radio button click, when that is clicked, we want to delete the entire row. Instead of passing the get adapter position, I could have very well just go ahead and say task here, right? Because it's very possible. It's just a task, which means this no longer works. That means I need to pass in the actual task. Well, how do I get that task? Well, the same thing as we did here, right? So what I can do, I can just extract this task outside, still inside of our method there. Now, depending on which one was clicked, we can go ahead and pass that exact task. So say current task in this case is equal to task list get and pass get adapter position like this. This works fine. In this case, I'm going to just pass the current task like that. And to even make it, because we're creating these objects there, I can just go ahead and create this object right here. I'm just going to cut all of this and say it's equal at the top there. So the moment that's clicked, we create that task and we go from there because the task is going to be the same regardless. Make sense? So I'm just going to get rid of this. So that just saves us from creating redundant code and objects. And there we have it. Right? So now again, we're passing the task. And going back to main activity here, you notice we still have an issue here because we need to implement another method. Why does that happen? Well, it's because, of course, onToDo, we just added this onToDo radio button click listener, right? So that's why, because we're implementing that, it's going to say, hey, there's one more method you need to implement because that is the contract. So onToDo radio, there it is. So now we can do what we want to happen when the radio button of each one of these items is clicked. So to show you, I'm going to just copy this, what I have here, real quick, so you can see exactly that this is happening. I'm going to say onToDo clicked, get task. Sure, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and run. Just open our logcat, still click. All right, let's click this task. onToDo click, looks like it's showing. Right, I just clicked, I clicked the row. Let's click one of these radio buttons here. Let's make it a little bigger. Let's start with this one. Click, to do is showing there because that's what we're getting. We're getting the task, right? Let's go to this one, task 2. You can see task 2 was clicked and onToDo click. And this is going to be on, let's say, on radio button. It's probably better that way. So we can distinguish. We know that this is happening, but just to make sure you know that I'm not lying to you. All right, let's click this one on radio button. Task 2 was clicked. I can go be well. There it is. This one, and voila. Very good. So the infrastructure is indeed working. And again, like I said, the idea here is that when we click onToDo radio button, we're just going to go ahead and get rid altogether of this row as well as deleting this item because that will signify that we are indeed done with this item. We've done it. Okay. So in this case here, look how easy it is. I want to delete this task. How do we do that? Well, we say task ViewModel dot delete. For deleting a task, we need what? We need a task object.
Where do we get that task? Conveniently, that's exactly what's been passed there. So say task, voila, that's great. Now, usually when you want to delete something, you probably need to ask the user whether or not this is exactly what they want to do. Okay, so that's something you can do yourself, create a pop-up, all right? So technically, when you want to delete something, you want to prompt the user to make sure they are aware that once they delete, they no longer will be able to see this item, okay? So in this case here, we're just going to do this way so I can show you that this works. And once we've done that, I can go ahead and say recycler view adapter and invoke the method called notify data set change. That way it's going to go ahead and notify you that, hey, something changed, and rerun or refresh the entire recycle view. Let's run this. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to click this one and that's gone. It's kind of hard to see because we have a lot of to-dos, but check this out. Notice the list is shrinking. That's gone. That's gone. Everything is gone. We're deleting a lot of things. Look at this, right? We can continue. Let's delete this guy. And if you want to see, go to Database Inspector. It's going to take a few seconds to actually pick up our device. There we go. I'm going to go to Database. Let's go say select all from table, task table. Run. Notice, there we go. And I'm going to make this live so that these updates, you can actually see them being deleted. I've been too kind. I'm going to get rid of that. Voila, it's leaving. Another task and that one as well. Okay, very well. We've just looked at radio button clicked, meaning we were able now to click on each radio button and be able to actually delete that task and remove the row. So that's really awesome. The next thing we need to think about is how do we pass data between activity and fragment, right? Because the idea here is very simple. We'll have an activity in the forefront so we can see all of to-dos. That's an activity which encloses or hosts our bottom sheet fragment. So we need to pass that information we have in a row onto this bottom sheet fragment so that we can then edit and save back or update that task. Again, the question is how. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do that, and some of them are not recommended anymore. Therefore, I'm not going to talk about them. But now, the best way for us to accomplish this, which means communicate between activity and fragment, in this case, passing the data, this object, onto the fragment from an activity, we're going to use ViewModel. Okay, so let's look at what a ViewModel is. So essentially, a ViewModel sits in the middle of our activity and our fragment. Okay, so the idea here is that a ViewModel is the mechanism that will hold the actual data, right, independent of whether we are an activity or a fragment or any other kind of user interface entity or controller. Okay, so think of it as something that is just sitting somewhere and we pass information that we need, and then whenever we want to retrieve that information, right, we just invoke it to get that information. So if ViewModel, what it does, prepares the data needed to be shared with or between other activities or fragments in a lifecycle conscious way. This just means that the ViewModel, it's its own entity. It doesn't care, or it doesn't really allow to be bothered with issues of life cycle, because you know activities and fragments, they do have their own life cycle. So if the ViewModel were to be attached to a life cycle, that means if something changes in the life cycle, it will have to be redrawn, or we would be able to, or in this case, we will lose that data. So that's the beauty here of ViewModel. Anything that we attach to a ViewModel is just going to be some sort of a bundle that will be sitting out there we can communicate with to get and send out data to anybody that needs it without being compromised with lifecycle. And that's what we're going to be using to facilitate this data swapping or data sharing. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. And the first thing we're going to do, let's get rid of some things that we no longer need here so that we don't have a cluttered workspace. Let's open our project, and inside of our model, we're going to right click and create another view model here. So this is going to be, I'm going to call this shared view model, like that. Okay, so for this to actually be a view model, I'm going to say extends view model. Very nice. There it is. So this shared view model here essentially is going to hold this data that we need to pass it around, but it will also allow us to create methods that will set the view model and allow us to get that view model. In this case, just the data, the object that we want. Does it make sense? So the first thing we are going to do here is we're going to create a mutable live data. So mutable means it can change depending on situation, okay? So mutable live data is just a live data that can actually easily change throughout the process of moving it around and do all sort of things. So I'm going to say private final mutable live data, and it's going to be a task object like this. I'm going to call this selected item. I'm going to say is equal to new mutable live data. Okay, so now we have the selected item is going to be immutable live data. All right. And so next I'm going to do getters and setters, because we want to be able to say, okay, if we are inside of an activity, we want to set this view model, this data that we want to be able to hold as a view model, so that then we can pass it around to whoever needs it. Okay, so I'm going to say public. I'm going to make them public because I want them accessible by anybody. Void, I'm going to say select item. Okay, and what item is this? It's just a task object like that. And this will do what? So I'm going to say selected item. Notice it's immutable live data, right? I'm going to say dot. I'm going to set the value of that selected item to what? Well, to our task. So now when we say shared view model select item, we will be expected to pass that object that we want to select to say, okay, now this is part of our mutable live data, which indeed is a view model. Okay, so we're setting, that's it. And now we want to be able to get it. So I'm going to say public. Now I'm going to expect to receive a live data type, right? Because that is the type that we want of task. I'm going to say what? Get selected item. We don't need to pass anything. Just return. Now I'm going to return a selected item like that. Now, where do we instantiate first this view model, this shared view model? Well, we understand that we want to go to main activity because this is where all of this is being hosted, it's showing, right? So that means then when we click one item, this eat less every day, that's the only thing we have, we want to be able to set our view model to this object here, because then we're going to be able to push that to our hidden fragment, right? The bottom sheet fragment. So for us to initiate or instantiate our view model, well, I'm going to create a private here, say item, and say shared view model. Call this shared view model. And then on create, this is where we do pretty much everything. I'm going to instantiate our view model. You notice that we have this task view model here we created a long time ago, right? This task view model is the same concept as the view model that we are talking about here, except this task view model here inherits from the Android view model. Let's take a look so that you are refreshed. Remember? So this concept is exactly the same. We have these getters and setters. We're setting things around, okay? The difference here is that this is Android view model. So it has more contextual Android features, whereas our shared view model, it extends or inherits from ViewModel class, okay? And if you hover over, it says a class that it prepares responsible for preparing and managing the data from activity or fragment, etc. Ah, very good. So all of these mechanisms are put out there for us to actually use to facilitate our lives as developers. You have to always think in these terms. All right, so now, how do we instantiate that? We're not going to instantiate the shared view model we created the way we did here. It's a little bit different, but not that different. So really, I'm going to say here, shared view model is going to be equal to new view model provider. And then I'm going to pass the owner this, right? And I'm going to say dot get, pass the class. It's going to be the shared view model that class like that. That's how we instantiate that. Now we can easily say something like the shared view model dot, look at this, set or select item. We pass our task and so forth easily. Now where we want to do that, right? Well, we want to select the item when we click on this row. Where does that happen? That happens whenever we call the onToDo click. Makes sense. And you notice here we have the task already. So we can use that by saying, now we're creating the actual view model, meaning we are establishing the view model that is going to be able to pass that information along to anyone who wants that information. In this case, our bottom sheet fragment, right? So I'm going to say view model or shared view model, okay, dot select item and pass our task.
And really, when I think about it, this on to do, we can change the signature here because this adapter position here really isn't needed, right? We just want the task. So what I can do, let's go to our on to do, click, actually where it's, there. And I'm going to get rid of that. It's going to create a few problems there. No problem. Let's go here. I'm going to get rid of that. This just makes our code more succinct and better anyway. And then looks like doesn't like that. Of course, I'm not passing that anymore. Okay, there we go. It's much better. We could have left as it was, as you saw, but I think this is just succinct because we just get the object and we're done. Okay? And there you have it. So now when we say share a view model that select item, okay, what this does simply is that anywhere else that we go ahead and implement share view model or call the shared view model, we're going to be able to collect that information. Now, where is exactly that we want to be able to retrieve this information that we've just saved in our shared view model? Well, it's going to be inside of our bottom sheet. So say bottom sheet fragment class there. There it is. So what do we need to think about here? Well, first of all, I'm going to create our view model and say private, okay, and shared view model as such. Now, where do we go ahead and invoke and get that information? It's not going to be on create view. Close this down, because on create view, this is where we're just creating the views, inflating things, and making sure that we actually get the view, right? We get inflated the object view, that is, right? However, the on view create, this is called when all of this is done, which means this is the place where we want to actually invoke the view model to get, in this case, the shared view model to see if it has any information that we need. Remember, now we are inside of a bottom sheet fragment. So inside of our main activity, what we're doing here, we created the shared view model, right? We select item and pass the task, the object. So now our view model has that task, the information we need. That means now we can retrieve it from anywhere. So happens that we want to retrieve it from our bottom sheet fragment because we want to be able to pull that information in case the person wants to edit this new task, or this task, I should say, and update it. Okay, so what we do now, somewhere here instead of on view created, that's very important, I'm going to say view model, right? I'm going to instantiate it, actually shared view model, okay? I'm going to the same thing we did before. I'm going to say new view model provider. And in this case here, I can't say this because this makes no sense because we're not inside of an activity. However, because we know that bottom sheet fragment as a fragment is being hosted, it must be hosted by an activity, right? So we can invoke the activity by saying require activity like that. Call that method and we can get that context and say dot get. The class is going to be shared view model, that class. So this shared view model is essentially the same as this shared view model here. Because remember, this is sitting somewhere and will communicate. It knows exactly if we select item, if we set it up somewhere, and then we're passing somewhere else, it's going to have the same integral, the same information. Very cool, right? So at this point here, what I can do is, because I have shared view model, which means from main activity, we have selected a task. That means now I can come down here and say something like this. I can say if the shared view model dot get, look at this, right? We have this get method, get selected item dot get value, right? Because remember that in the shared view model here, this selected item here, we set the value because it's immutable live data, right? Just think of it's just like a bundle. We're wrapping this task into a live data that is mutable. And that's why we can set a value to that bundle or that box. So we're putting this task inside of this box selected item, which is a mutable live data, right? When we say get selected, we're returning the live data of task. So the actual task that was put in as a mutable live data, which also includes just live data, right? And we can remove that or retrieve, that is, right? So I can check to make sure that there is indeed something. So I'm going to say it's not null, okay? If we have something selected, right? Because sometimes we may not have anything. It happens, right? In this case here, then I can do something like this. I have that information because I know that I have the object, right? I can even say something like this. Look at this. I can say task is equal to shared view model that gets selected, that get value, like this. There we go. So I have a text object. In this case here, I can say log d and say task dot get task. Let's say my, like that, so we can see the differences. I'm going to save. And before I go anywhere, I want to make sure that whenever we say on to do click, right, whenever we click on our row, I want to also call the show bottom sheet dialog. It makes sense because that's when we're going to be able to go through this process of on create, right, this method here, on create view is created to create everything, and on view created also. That's very important. And that's the idea really, is that when we click, that will pop up and eventually we're going to pull in the information that we've clicked onto our edit text and go from there. Okay, let's go ahead and run. And let's go to our log cat and make sure we have, I think it's my, like this, okay? Okay, let's go ahead, moment of truth, click, and voila, eat less every day is been passed around. And this is coming from where? On view created, which is exactly here. It may seem very trivial and insignificant, but this is crucial what we've done here. Because of ViewModel, we're able to pass around this object. Okay, so if we add, let's go ahead, I'm going to add something new here, new task, okay, and I'm going to give it, I want this to be tomorrow, and let's save that. Okay, so right, there's new task. Okay, I'm going to do it again. This is new task, click, look at it, and went ahead and showed the new task. Very good, so it's working, that's for sure. Okay, I'm going to click every day again, and there we go, every day. Now, showing new task here is because our edit text is always showing what was there previously, but we're going to fix that later. But at least I want you to know that this is working perfectly. This is huge, because now that we have that information through our view model, we can do all sort of things. One of which, of course, is to make sure that we populate our edit text, as you saw there, correctly, and we can start doing all that. And we can allow users to update this task. Very well, so things are working great. However, let's check something out here. Okay, so let's open again our logcat. We have my, okay, the tag. Let's click here. Notice eat less every day. Everything is working. However, if I click out and click new task again, we see new task working in our log here. However, our enter to do here, because we're setting the task, and we're setting to the same task object, right? But we still see here eat less every day. What's going on? What's happening here is that we must make sure that the set text is actually cleared before we move forward. But you will see that this strategy is also not going to work if we just go ahead and say, for instance, when we enter this if statement, we can say enter to do that set text and give it an empty, right? So to clear it out. Let's see if that works. All right, I'm going to click the first one, eat less, that's fine, but then I go away, come back, click this one, eat less, still working, and the same problem persists. So the problem here is very simple, really, is that because we are inside on view created, right, this is it's called once the view is created. So this is not the place where all of the widgets are going to be refreshed. So the widgets are not going to be refreshed actually, because by this point the widgets have been created and they're set. That's the reason why this is futile. It's not even doing anything. The best place for us to put this code to actually see it working, it would be on resume. Because on resume is going to be called when the fragment begin interacting with the user, which means everything will be refreshed then. Does that make sense? So check this out. If I go back outside of this on view created and start typing something like on resume, right, for fragment here, and I'm going to take this code, all of this, cut it out and put it there, you will see that we won't have those issues anymore, and we won't need to go ahead and set the text to empty, because everything will be recreated every time this is called, which will be called every time that we go out and back like that. Okay, let's go ahead and run. Okay, moment of truth. Of course, the logcat is still open there, and click there. Eat less every day, right? That was clicked, and I'm going to click new task. If all goes well, we should see this repopulating, showing new task, because that is what's clicked. Click outside, click again, new task is there. All right, if I click out and go back to eat less, we should see eat less there. This is good. So this is where our if statement should be inside of resume, so that we can get what we want. In this case, be able to update dynamically the edit text. Notice that the instantiation of our shared view model
that happens still inside on view created, because this has to happen when all the view have been created. That's very important distinction here, okay? But because we have our shared view model as an instance variable of the entire class, that's why we're able to call it whatever we want, including inside of our onResume callback method lifecycle. Now the question is, okay, so we have everything set up like this, so that means we are pulling in the correct object, right? New task, there it is. I can go up like this and click like that, or click like this, right? And try to add something else. And I can go to look at the date and can go ahead and update and save that. So the idea is we want to be able to save a new copy, because this will tell us that indeed we are trying to update or edit this current clicked row. Now, how do we approach that? Because at this point here, the way things are, when we populate our fragment here, bottom sheet fragment, we have the correct object. But now the idea is as follows. How are we going to distinguish between saving and updating? Because if we click any of these, so we got it to work, so we pull in the correct object, the correct do or task, right? Like this. If I go ahead and say, for instance, update like this, right? And I click here and I select tomorrow and I click update or save. In this case, it's not going to update. It's going to go ahead and create a new copy. As you see, it says new task update, and we still have the new task previously added. So this is not updating. So we need to find the mechanism that will work for us, that will allow us to know, okay, if we click any of these, that means now we are going to update, or we are trying to edit the current row or the current task that needs to update it, not saved as a new instance of this object or of this task. So for that, there's different mechanisms to do so. Let me go ahead and delete this one. Okay, we can do that using a different mechanism, but I'm going to propose this other mechanism because we understand that item view model, or a view model that we created, in this case here, shared view model, this allows us to pass through messages, okay, from our activity to fragment and vice versa if we need to do so. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of that and create another instance variable here. I'm going to say private. It's going to be a Boolean called is edited, like this, okay? Or maybe is edit, so that we know, is this going to be for editing or it's just a new item that we're trying to create. Because the mechanics are still the same. In order to create a new item, we have to pull in our show bottom sheet and add something, right? So we are reusing everything, but we need to distinguish whether we're coming in to edit an item or we're coming in as to add a new item, new task. So let's create getters and setters here. I'm going to say public void set is edit. So to set is edit, of course, I'm going to pass a Boolean is edit like that. And then I'm going to say this, that is edit is equal to is edit. We're setting that. Now we also create a getter here. So I'm going to say public, going to be a Boolean because that's what we're trying to get. Get is edit. No need to pass anything. We're just going to go ahead and return is edit. So when we set is edit, it's either true or false, and then we can get that value. Okay, so that means then we go back to main activity, because that's where we are passing information through the on to do click, because all of this is still going to happen when we click this item here. So first one we shared, we select the item, the task, and also what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use share view model, right? Same class. I'm going to say set is edit to true, because I want this to be true, meaning if whenever they click the entire row, I want to edit. That's the whole idea, right? So I'm going to send that information, or at least I'm going to contain that information through our share field holder. That way I can pull it back in our bottom sheet fragment. So in this case here, inside of our onResume, because that's where we put everything, right? We moved everything to. What I'm going to do now, actually, at the top as an instance variable, I'm going to say private Boolean is edit as such, okay? And then inside here, where I know that we have something in our shared view model, I'm going to say is edit. I'm going to set it up here. It's going to be equal to shared view model dot get is edit. Okay. So now it should be true because we know that there's something that we're getting from our shared view model, and we set it all up inside of our main activity to true because we want to edit. So if that's the case, then, because that's where we're setting things up here, we know is that it is true. In this case, we're going to go back to our save button here. So we're going to do something different here. In our save button, what we need to do is we need to further look through the conditions, because as it is right now, it is set up so that we can create a new task, right? But that's not what I want to do. So I want to make sure that we have this if statement, all is good, but also we want to make sure to check before we insert anything, right? So I'm going to add an if statement inside of this if statement. I'm going to say if, okay? If isEdit is true, I can just say isEdit, right? If it's true, then we need to do something else, right? That means we need to update this item. So I'm going to say task, call this update task as such. I'm going to set it to what? I'm going to say ViewModel. I'm going to say shared ViewModel that get selected item, right? I'm going to get the value, and it's going to be the task object. Actually, it has to be just the get value. That's how we're going to get the actual object like this, right? So I'm going to say update task. I'm going to set task to what? Well, to the task, which is going to be this task here, because at this point, our enter to do will have the current task because we set that up just now, right? And then I'm going to say update task. So I'm setting up this new object here. I'm going to say set date created. To get a date created, I'm just going to say calendar, that get instance, that get time, because this is when it's created right now when we update this, right? And then I'm going to say update task.set priority. And for now, we haven't set up our priority. I'm just going to say priority high. Okay, we're going to change that later. And then I'm going to say update task.set due date, right? The due date is going to be the same because regardless of anything, if we change the due date as we want to update or are editing this task, we're going to still pull in the correct due date. So we don't have to worry about that. And then we're going to do something different. Instead of insert, this is an update. So we say task view model, and then we say update. Well, to update, we need to pass the task, which is this new loaded update task. This is how we do it. And then I'm going to say else. In any other case, of course, it's going to be what we have here. So I can put inside of curly braces, but it's just one statement. So this will work. So let's test this out to see. But before we do that, let's make sure to think a little bit here. So if isEdit is true, that's when we actually know to update. Makes sense. But we also want to make sure that once we have updated, we want to set isEdit to false. Okay, just for a good measure. So I'm going to say, in this case, share view holder. I'm going to set isEdit to false right away. All right, let's see if we can edit this one here. Click. Wonderful. Let's go and say update. And we're going to change for tomorrow or any date really. And let's see. Right. Nice. It's updated. Now, on the same token, let's see if we can go ahead and create a new one. Let's delete all of this, by the way, just it's residual from previous, of course. And I'm going to say eat less. So I should say next week that and click. We should see eat less. There we go. And if we go ahead and if you wanted to also edit this one, we can certainly do. Go back and date and we can say that's fine and save. It's going to give us the update. Okay, so it is indeed working. So we're making real good progress here, but there are a few things I think we need to address before we move forward and work on other big things. The first one is you notice something that is a little bit annoying here. So if you click and want to add something, let's say I want to add eat lots of bread as such, and I say enter, and then I go to the date, I say tomorrow for instance, and I go save. The keyboard persists here, and it's not really great user interface or user experience, but also it would be nice to make it so that whenever we save, we'll collapse everything. So at some point, of course, we hide the keyboard, and secondly, we also collapse our bottom sheet. And you can see eat lots of bread was added. That's kind of handy. All right, so the first thing we need to do, let's go to our utilities. There we have these utilities. I'm going to create a function here. Now this is going to be a utility function which will allow us to hide the soft keyboard. So I'm going to say public. Let's close this down. Public static void hide soft keyboard as such. And then we're going to need to pass a view like this. Okay, let's go ahead and import our view. Very well. So what we're going to do here, first of all, we're going to have to invoke the input method manager such. Call this IM. Okay, and let's cast this to input manager. Before we go forward, I'm going to say view.getContext like this. I'm going to say get
system service, and inside I'm going to use context, and it's going to be input method service like that. All right, so we're getting a hold of our input method manager there. So once I have an input manager, I'm going to use that to say hide soft input from window as such, and I'm going to say view.get window token and pass flag 0. So this is the code that really, frankly speaking, you should just have in your toolbox so that whenever you need it, you can use it. So this is how you hide the soft keyboard. So where are we going to be calling that? Let's go back to our bottom sheet fragment. And there are a few places where we could call it. The first one is going to be when we click on the calendar button. Let's go find where we have our calendar button. There we go. So here we are setting the visibility of the calendar, and it will be nice to go ahead and say utils.hide soft keyboard and pass our view like this. Let's go and organize this code better. I think that's much better like that, or even put that in one line. All right. Okay, let's add one. So be happy. The moment you click, notice now that we have this view showing our calendar, as we said here. Now the keyboard is hidden, so we can play around with what we want here. Okay, I'm going to go save. Okay, all right, let's add one item. Call this be happy. Click tab. If you click, we should see now it hide the soft keyboard. I'm going to say tomorrow. I'm going to go and save. We should see that now be happy is indeed saved. Very well. The other thing that we need to do here is that when we save, we have an if statement, the main if statement. It works fine, but we forgot to add the else, all right? The else here. What is it that we want to happen? In this case here, I'm just going to add a snack bar that make. I'm going to pass a view. I'm going to use the save button view, and I'm going to say r.id.empty, and I'm going to say r.string.empty field like this. And then I'm going to say snack bar length is going to be long and show. So essentially this empty field we've created or came with our starter project, which if you click, it's going to say empty task, which means we need to add something. Okay. All right. There we have it. Just a little defensive programming there. Now, the other thing will also be nice to do is to dismiss, right? So if I click and add a new item here, say, hello world again, and click there. I can go get a nice different date. And what I want to be able to do is whenever we say save, we want to dismiss our bottom sheet fragment. Okay, that'd be nice because then we will be taken to our main list here. Okay, to do that, because we're inside, of course, in our bottom sheet fragment, we have a way of dismiss the fragment, or in this case, the bottom sheet completely. So we can come down here inside of a save button, right? Instead of our if statement, all is good. Outside, right about here, after we have our else, what I can do, I can say if this being our bottom sheet fragment is visible, right? If it's visible at this point, we've clicked enter, we've clicked save, we want to say this, that, dismiss. If we run again, let's give it a try. Newest item, I'm running out of things to add. Click, there we go. I can scroll up and I want this to be somewhere later and save. You see, now it's dismissed, went down, and we can see now we have a newest item added. Very well, so it's working perfectly. Can go ahead and delete some of these old items if I wish to do so. So we have a few items left there. Okay, very good. So very simple things, but as you see, the simple things usually make our user interface as well as the user experience even better. So those little things are very important in the perspective of the user experience. Okay, now let's look at the priority button, which is hidden. So any trick here, if you are on Mac, say Command E or Control E for Windows, this will pop up. So this is the most recent files that we've opened. So it's very handy, helps us not to have to click everywhere in our editor. So I want to go to the bottom sheet there so I can show you exactly what we're going to be working on next. And sometimes it takes a little while to initialize our views. All right, so let's close this down. As you may remember that we have a lot of hidden things here, one of which is, of course, the radio group priority. So this is the one that will have all of the radio buttons. So let me go ahead and click here and change the visibility. Instead of gone, let's make this visible so you can see. There it is. As you see, this is our radio group priority that we need to set up. So the idea again is as we add this information, right? We add this item or this to do, we have our date set up, okay? And we are able to save everything. So far, the priority, we have hard coded it and we've saved the priorities hard coding it, which is not the best approach. Obviously, we want to make sure that users have the possibility, the capability of picking the priority. So that's what we're going to be working on now. So the idea is when we click this button here, this is the priority button, and depending on the situation, depending on whether this is already visible or not, this will show so that they can pick, and then we're going to save that priority. And when we save this to-do item, that's what we're going to be doing. All right, before I forget, let's put this back to gone like that. Very good. So let's go to our code. I'm going to get rid of this, back to our code. So this is inside of our bottom sheet fragment, obviously, because this is where we're setting everything up. Right below our calendar view, I'm going to go ahead and add, say, priority button as such, a set on click listener. I'm going to pass new on click listener as such. And we're going to make this lambda to simplify our lives. Now, you notice also there's a lot of view 13 and view 1. The reason why, because we're using lambda and we're inside of our class here, there's a lot of views that we're passing in. So this is an attempt from our editor to identify or to make unique IDs. Okay, so don't worry too much. That's totally fine. All right, what is it that we want to happen? Well, the first thing we actually want to happen here is we want to use utils and hide the soft key. This will hide the soft keyboard key. That way we don't have to deal with it. Okay, so I'm going to pass our view 13 there. Very good. Now, the main thing we want to do here is we want to set the visibility to our priority radio group, right? So Command E again, sheet. Should have left it open, but oh well. There we go. So we want to make sure that this radio group here is on or off. So visible or invisible. In this case, we want to make it visible. So I'm going to say priority radio group, okay, dot set visibility like that. Now, in order for us to set a visibility, we need to get the current state of this priority radio group, whether it's visible or not. So I'm going to say priority group again, dot get visibility. Okay, let me put all of this perhaps in a new line so we can actually see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the visibility is, in this case, gone, so view.gone. So if that's true, then I want to make this visible because I've just clicked this and this has to be visible. Okay, else I want to make this gone. That's the logic here. So we're toggling it again, just like what we did with the date, just like what we did with the calendar button. The same idea here. Very good. And once we have that done, because remember this is a radio group, which means it contains a few radio buttons inside. So we need to go through and check which ones have been selected. And if the first one was selected, and then we pull that information that we want. Does it make sense? So in this case here, we can say priority, radio group. We can also set on checked change listener. So there is such event handler that we can pass. In this case here, so I'm going to say new on check event listener like that. Of course, we can use lambda to facilitate our code and our lives. It says here radio group and I. This I, I'm going to change this to just say checked ID. Okay, so that it's more readable. All right. So what's the idea here? So we're going to check to see which button was clicked. Again, going back here, we need to check which one was clicked so that we know exactly what was the selected priority. If it's high, medium, or low. How do we do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to say if, again. First, we're going to say priority radio group. I'm going to check the visibility, get visibility. If it's visible, right? If that's the case, then I'm going to get the current checked ID. That means that's visible, and I want to figure out, okay, which one is checked. And I'm going to say selected button. Remember all of these variables we've created a long time ago when I said we're going to create them now so that we can later use them. Okay, remember selected button there. So now we're setting them up. And once I have that check button ID, that's when I can actually create, or in this case, go fetch the actual selected radio button. So I'm going to say selected radio button. Notice it's a radio button type. I'm going to say view dot find by. Instead of saying r.id, I can just say selected button ID. because that would have the ID of the current selected button. And in this case, I'm going to just create the actual selected button, or in this case, selected radio button, I should say. Does that make sense? And then I'm going to say if, okay, I'm checking in, if selected radio button dot get ID. Remember, this is going to happen each time that we change. Remember, this is going to run each time we are going back and forth, meaning if we're clicking on this one, and that one, depending on which one we clicked, we're going to fetch the correct radio button. That's what we're doing here. That's why we are retrieving the selected button ID as things change, as users may be clicking the first one, second one, or third one. Okay, so now we're checking for the IDs. If the ID is equal, for instance, r.id.radio high, so the high priority was selected, then I'm going to set priority, say priority, which we haven't created, set to priority dot high, like this. Let's go ahead and create our priority type, enum. Remember that it was an enum type. So I'm going to say private, priority, like that. And there we go. So, and you see priority now is priority high. Makes sense because they've clicked the priority high. Else if, right, if selected radio button dot get ID is equal to r.id dot radio medium, then priority is going to be set to priority medium. And you can guess else if selected radio button dot get ID is equal to r.id dot radio low, then priority is equal to priority low. Now, because we like to do defensive programming, I'm going to say else in any other case. Let's not forget our semicolon there. In any other case, what I'm going to do, priority is going to be equal to priority low. Okay, so if they haven't selected anything for some reason, we're just going to make the priority low. Now, because this priority low in any other case, it's only going to work if, of course, our priority group is visible. So what I want to do, so click outside here. Also, I'm going to add another else statement here that would say in any other case, I'm going to make sure that priority is always priority low. Okay, notice this is the main if statement. So if the visibility is invisible, meaning that they haven't even opened up or clicked the priority button, I'm just going to go ahead and set the priority to low. That way the users are able to go and still save their item. Okay, very good. So now that we have a priority, because it's an instance variable of this class, so it's visible anywhere, I can use it here in our if statements, right? In our save button, because we have that to make sure that we don't have an empty field, and also due date is not null, and I can continue and say, and priority is not equal to null, like that. Okay. In this case here, we have a full complete cycle, which means now instead of passing priority like this, because this is hard coded, I can just pass priority like that. And here too, I'm going to just pass priority and we're set. All right, let's go ahead and run. Okay, very well. Let's see if this works. I'm going to create a new one, finish app. Okay, click. Very good. It's working perfectly. I can go up and I'm going to say the 23rd tomorrow. And the moment I go ahead and click there, and you notice nothing is working here. What's going on? It looks like, right, I made a mistake. This is not get window visibility, is get visibility. Little differences here. So, all right, let's go ahead and rerun this. That was a little mistake here. That should be get visibility. I think we should be good this time. Okay, let's give it another try. Let's say finish and let's click. There we go. I'm going to say tomorrow. Very good. And when I click there, voila, it's showing. And if I click back, it's going to hide. This is very good. And now I can say I want this priority to be high. And the moment I save, voila, there we go. Priority is high. And of course, we added our new item. And I can edit that. So click again. And I can say finish up is going to be not really. Okay. And let's go. I'm going to change for next week. And priority is going to be medium. Save. There we go. It changed for next week, January 30th. That's very good. And priority also changed, I think, to medium. I'm going to go to inspector because we can't see visually the priorities yet, but we'll do that in a bit. And we should be able to see that everything is actually working perfectly. All right, there we go. Let's open up our database. I'm going to say select all from table, task table. There we go. And we should see, there we go. It changed to medium. So everything is good. All right. Congratulations. So it is working perfectly. It was a little bit of coding there, but nothing that we can't handle. And congratulations for getting to this point. So mistakes like that happen. So make sure whenever you're invoking methods, okay, that you get the correct ones. There are a lot of methods that look alike, so it's easy to make that mistake, as you saw me actually do here. So there we go, no problem. We fix it and we're good to go. We're really making good progress here. There's a few things we need to do. One of which is make it so that we have all these items color-coded. Because you see, our priorities don't really show visually. So we do have all of them in our database. You can see priority high, 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 and medium. But there's no way for us to know visually, or the users to know visually, which one is high and so forth. So to make this app even more, let's say, modern and so forth, we're going to make it so that we have some elements of our user interface color-coded. Okay? To do that, we need to open our Recycle View adapter. Let's get rid of all of these other guys that we're not really interested in. So where all that happened, let's go to where we're setting everything up, which is going to be inside of our unbind view holder, that is. So here is where we do the work. So what are we trying to do here? Well, first of all, we're trying to make it so that this chip changes color as well as the actual task, right? So if this task's priority is high, then we're going to change the color to a red, right? To signal the user that this is indeed high priority and they have to do it. And if it's medium, we change a different color and so forth. So how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, in order for us to change the colors of these widgets, we need to use the color state list, which is a class that we can pass a two-dimensional array with those colors and so forth. So don't worry too much about the technicalities of this, and I'll just show you how to do that. Okay, so first thing we need to do, I'm going to say color. So I'm going to create here a color state list from Android content, call this color state, and again it's going to be new color state list, which will give us the states of different colors. And you can see we have two parameters we need to pass. The first one is going to be a two-dimensional array, and the other one is going to be a mono-dimensional array. Okay, so what are we going to do? I'm going to say new int. Look at that, it even tells us exactly what we need to pass. And then I'm going to also pass here new int just for one, like this. All right, let's finish like that. All right, so for our first two-dimensional array there, we're going to create a new int inside. And this one here is going to have the states. And so for the first state here, I'm going to say dash android.r.attribute, like this. And I'm going to say state enabled. Okay. And the next, I'm going to say new, again, create another int array here. This one is going to have the same thing. I'm going to say Android R attribute. Okay, this is internal Android. I'm going to say state also enable. I could have said disable, but I'm going to just make those enabled as well. Okay, so in this case here, I chose to make both of them enabled, but I could have changed that. So this is the state. This is the default state of whatever widget we're going to be using. This is going to be the default state for our color. Because remember, every button or every widget we have, they have a color state list. Because if you click, for instance, look closely here. I'm going to make this a little bigger. If you click, you see there's that change in color there. Okay, I'm going back there. So click again. There's change of color that you see there. So that's what we're talking about. So every widget has that internally. So what we're trying to do here is to override that color state. So now this is where the fun begins. All right, so now next, this is where we actually put the state that we want to override. In this case here, in our second array parameter, I'm going to say color dot light gray. What this means really is this is the disabled state. So when we use this color state and attach it to a widget, the disabled state where it's not enabled, right? It's going to have this light gray. Okay. Now, the important part here, which is the enable part, that means now when the item is enabled, what is the color we want to pass? In this case here, this is where we're going to pass a different priority color depending on the task's priority. So I'm going to say utils.priority color, and I'm going to pass a task like this. Now we haven't created this yet, so I'm going to go ahead and create that and explain what that really means. Okay,
So what we're going to be doing here is this priority color. When we call, we're going to pass the task. And within the task, we're going to check whether the priority is high, and then we're going to create a color. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an int color, because the colors are actually saved as an integer. So that's what we need to return. And so here I'm going to say if the task that we're passing, that get priority, is equal to priority high. If that's the case, then the color we're going to be returning, I'm going to create a color by saying color using the color class .argb. Okay, so that contains alpha. And I know the colors already that we want. So for this case, I want 200 for our alpha. So it's going to be very bright, right? And then for int red, the RGB numbers, for red part, I'm going to say 2 or 1. And then green is going to be 21. Again, these are predefined colors, so I know them. That's why I'm comfortable adding those there like that. Okay, there we go. And then else if task get priority is equal to priority medium. If that's the case, I'm going to say color, construct another color here using RGB. I'm going to say color, RGB, and the alpha is going to be the same one to make it visible. And then red's going to be 155, 179, and 0, like that. And the last one is just an else. We're just going to say color is equal to color, RGB, still 200, and it's going to be 51 for red, 181 for green, and 129 for blue. And of course, when all is said and done, we're going to go ahead and return our color. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. We're just color coding depending on the priority for each one of these tasks. So going back here, that's what we're doing there. Okay, so this is going to change depending. Now this has to be used somewhere. Okay, this color state, and we need to pass like this again, because as I said, every widget must have this color state class or object in order for it to know how to change its color state. Now, what do we want to do really? So in our case here, what are the things that we want to change color depending on the priority? Well, first of all, I'm going to say holder. I'm going to go ahead and get the today chip. I'm going to set text color. Okay, see, it wants me to pass an integer directly or a color state list of colors. In this case, I'm going to say utils. Just want to pass that color, that priority color, and pass our task like that. So depending on the task, the priority, it's going to go ahead and fetch the correct color. Very nice. I'm going to say holder, that today chip, and I'm going to set the chip icon tint. There we go. For the tint, we actually need to go to pass the color state list, which is exactly what we created. I'm going to go ahead and say color state list like this. Okay, so this is what it's going to go ahead and call this directly. All right, so and then I'm going to say holder again, dot radio button, because I want this radio button also to have different color. I'm going to say dot set button tint list. I'm going to pass the color state like this. All right, and there we have it. So now we're guaranteed that the colors will change for our radio button, the text, and as well as this background of our chip and the internal items inside, especially actually the icon, because that's what we did there, as well as the text. All right, let's go ahead and save this and run and see. Aha, and voila, just like that, it went ahead and called these utils and looked at the priority color, right? And looked to see if that task has priority high, and then it's going to be all red. Okay, very nice. Let's make this a little bigger so we can actually see the whole thing, right? And so if the priority is medium, of course, we have this green color there. Else, it's going to be low. We don't have a low. But if I add a new here, I'm going to click there and add a low one. So low priority. Let's just say next week. Say low. Look at this. If I save, and voila, you can see now low priority and went and fetch those colors to give the user this visual representation of whether this is high priority, medium, or low. And there you have it. Okay, pretty neat. So now the app looks much better. It looks cleaner and has all the visuals that we need. We can still go ahead and delete and do all sort of things and go from there. So you can see that it does take a little bit of work, obviously, to create something decent, but it is also fun. And once you get used to this thought process, it's not that bad, right? we've created here a pretty solid application. Of course, there's more things we can do, there's more cleaning up we can do and so forth. But the idea here is that I wanted to illustrate how fun really it is to build an application from scratch, and a really good application, in my humble opinion, I should say, that hopefully will give you some insights as to how to go about building a full-fledged application using Vroom. Well, I hope you enjoyed this mini course. If you are watching me now, wow, congratulations, and thank you for going through the entire course. And I really hope you enjoyed this course, this mini course, and I hope that you found a lot of value. And if you want to learn more about Android development, and I'm talking about from not knowing anything to learning how to build apps such as this, I would like to invite you to my full course, which has more than 46 hours of content. Of course, you don't have to watch that in one sitting, but you can get that course exclusively on Udemy, and you can see the links below. Just go scroll. There's a description below. I put a link there, and there's a sale going on right now, so you can get the course at a fraction of what it usually costs. So it's a great opportunity. As you see, in this course, I'm building a lot of different apps. I'm showing you exactly how to build Android apps the right way. This course is as comprehensive as it comes, and it has a lot of content, a lot of good stuff. So I really would like to invite you to the course, and I would love to see you in the course. Thank you so much. Don't forget, just in the description below, there is the link to the course. Thank you again for your time. I'll see you in class.